My name is Elena, and I am 47 years old. I live in a tiny apartment in the heart of Brooklyn, in one of those red brick buildings that are slowly crumbling under the weight of time and the humidity of the East River. New York is not a city for people like me, a second-generation immigrant with an accent that still echoes Galicia, the land of my grandparents, which I crossed on a cargo flight when I was 20, fleeing a husband who drank more than he ate and left me with bruises as unwanted souvenirs. Here, in this jungle of concrete and neon, I have survived by cleaning offices in Manhattan during the day, marble floors that shine like fake mirrors, and serving coffee in a Williamsburg diner at night, smelling of rancid grease and other people's dreams. My hands, calloused and cracked from chlorine and industrial soap, are my resume. They have scrubbed countertops in millionaires' penthouses, folded sheets in five-star hotels, and cradled children from families who barely look me in the eye. But money always slips through my fingers like sand, rents that rise like the tide, medical bills for sciatica that stabs me in the back, and a sister in Miami who asked me for loans for her opportunities that never come. It was in a Facebook group, Nannies and Caregivers in NYC, where I saw the ad. Night nanny wanted for 3-year-old boy. Flexible shifts, generous pay, stable family in Park Slope. The accompanying photo showed a blonde boy with curls that fell in perfect spirals over his pale forehead and blue eyes that sparkled like silver coins sunk to the bottom of a forgotten well. His name was Mateo. "He's a little angel," the users commented. What a blessing to take care of him. I called that same afternoon, my heart beating like a drum out of rhythm. The voice on the other end was Laura's, the mother's, soft with that polite tone of upper-middle-class housewives, but tinged with a weariness that cannot be disguised by yoga or organic lattes. Elena, really. My husband and I work on Wall Street. I'm in finance, he's in corporate litigation, and we come home exhausted. Mateo needs someone to put him to sleep to calm him down. Can you start on Monday? We pay $25 an hour, cash if you want. I didn't ask for references or a formal contract. I just said yes, because my bank account was in the red, and my last job, caring for an octogenarian with Alzheimer's on the Upper East Side, had ended with him confusing me with his late wife and throwing a Ming vase at my head. On Monday at 7 in the evening, I took the R train from Brooklyn to Prospect Park, my black canvas bag hanging from my shoulder like dead weight, filled with spare diapers, a thermos of black coffee, and a blue apron that I had washed that morning at the laundromat on the corner. The autumn air in New York was crisp, with that smell of dry leaves and hot dogs from street vendors, but I was sweating under my worn wool jacket, nervous as a teenager on her first date. Laura opened the door of her brownstone on a tree-lined street in Park Slope, with Victorian streetlights flickering like tired eyes. She was a woman in her mid-30s, with brown hair cut in a neat bob, Lululemon leggings, and an organic cotton t-shirt that screamed, "Yoga Mom." "Elena, come in, please." Mateo's finishing dinner. The interior was the American dream condensed, varnished oak floors that creaked softly under my worn sneakers, walls painted in cream tones with family photo frames, vacations in the Hamptons, Christmas in Aspen, and an essential oil diffuser in the entryway that perfumed everything with lavender and eucalyptus, covering up the faint smell of used diapers wafting from the back. She led me into the kitchen, a gleaming granite island with stainless steel appliances, where Mateo was strapped into his high chair, kicking his legs with an enthusiasm that made the cutlery in the drawer rattle. He was smaller than I expected, a compact ball of soft pink flesh, with chubby cheeks dotted with faint freckles and blonde curls that caught the LED light from the range hood like strands of spun gold. His eyes, large and glacial blue, scanned me as I entered without blinking, as if I were a specimen under a microscope. "Hi, Mateo. I'm Elena," I said, extending my hand with a forced smile. He didn't respond. He just opened his mouth in a perfect O, dropping a stream of organic carrot puree, the kind that comes in recycled glass jars, which splattered the linen tablecloth and dripped down his chin in orange rivulets. Laura laughed, wiping him with a cloth napkin. He's a little reserved with strangers, but he's a ray of sunshine once he gets to know you. Look, he's already smiling at you. It wasn't a smile. It was a grimace, lips stretched over tiny pearly teeth. But I nodded, feigning enthusiasm. Her husband, Javier, a name that surprised me, like an echo from my past, peeked out from the study, tall, wearing a navy blue suit wrinkled at the elbows, metal-rimmed glasses, and a stubbly beard that gave him the air of a distracted professor. "Welcome, Elena. You're our savior. If you need anything, the Wi-Fi is Park Slope Dreams and password on the fridge." He gave me a firm, dry handshake and kissed Mateo's crown with a "behave yourself, champ." They drove off in their black Audi Q5, taillights disappearing into the autumn fog, leaving the echo of her heels on the sidewalk. Silence fell like a heavy curtain. The brownstone, with its 3 stories and high ceilings, felt vast and empty. Only the ticking of a wall clock in the living room, a Swiss cuckoo clock Laura had inherited from her grandmother, and the distant hum of the subway vibrating through the walls like an underground pulse. I began the routine Laura had detailed for me: bath in the porcelain tub upstairs with warm water at 98 degrees Fahrenheit, exact as indicated by the baby thermometer, hypoallergenic chamomile soap that smelled like English meadows, and a yellow rubber duck floating like a sentinel. Mateo splashed with delight, his chubby little hands splashing water that soaked my blouse right down to my skin. But his laughter was a low gurgle, almost a purr, that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end for a fleeting moment. I dried him off with a terry cloth towel, soft as clouds, put him in his organic cotton pajamas with a star print, size 2T, bought at Bye Bye Baby, and took him to his room. The room was a child's sanctuary. Pale blue walls with murals of clouds and paper airplanes, a cherry wood crib with bars carved like willow branches, and in the corner, the rocking chair. The rocking chair, a Victorian relic of dark oak with arms curved like friendly claws and a soft cushion covered in plaid fabric. "It's magical," Laura had said with a nervous laugh as she showed it to me. "It calms him down in minutes." I sat him on my lap, his warm, heavy little body against my chest. He weighed about 13 pounds, according to Laura, and opened the storybook. "Goodnight Moon," the classic that all New York mothers swear by. I read to him in a low, modulated voice, feeling his weight sink into the cushion, his little legs hanging limply like dead weights. Then the lullaby. "Sleep, my child. Sleep now." Adapted into English, with an accent that sounded clumsy, but he didn't complain. I turned off the table lamp, a ceramic Maya the bee that cast dancing shadows, leaving only the phosphorescent glow of the adhesive stars on the ceiling, imported from Etsy. That's when it started. His head nestled on my shoulder, his breath a soft, rhythmic hiss in my ear, but his little fingers, still sticky from the organic apple juice he had sipped at dinner, climbed up my neck. At first, I took it as a gesture of affection, a clumsy, childish hug in the dim light. But no, they squeezed gently at first, like an innocent massage from chubby thumbs, pressing just below my jaw, where the carotid artery pulses like an underground river. The air stuck in my throat, a muffled gasp that I suppressed out of maternal instinct, or what was left of it in me after 2 miscarriages in my 30s. I tried to move, to straighten my back in the rocking chair, but his little body tensed against mine, an immovable weight of soft flesh and fragile bones anchoring me to the seat. "Mateo," I whispered, my voice a broken thread, but he didn't respond. Only that constant hissing, now amplified in my ear like the wind in an empty subway tunnel. The rocking chair continued to sway by inertia, creaking like arthritic joints, and time stretched into an eternity of contained panic. My lungs burned, demanding oxygen that didn't quite arrive, and black spots danced in my vision, eclipsing the stars on the ceiling. I thought about running away, leaving him there, and running down the stairs to the street where neighbors walked Labrador retrievers and drank wine from plastic cups. But I didn't. Something in me, that immigrant guilt, that invisible servant's guilt, kept me still, waiting for him to relax. And he did after what seemed like hours, but were only minutes, his fingers loosening like loose springs, rolling to one side with an unintelligible murmur. "Mommy." "No." I lifted him with trembling arms, placing him in the crib with the care of someone handling glass, and retired to the kitchen on the ground floor. I made some chamomile tea, Lipton tea bags from the corner supermarket. But I didn't drink it. I just watched the steam rise like ghosts, while my neck throbbed with a dull heat. I stayed up until 2 in the morning, watching from the living room sofa, a green leather Chesterfield that smelled of furniture polish, with the TV on mute, showing infomercials for Ginsu knives. When Laura and Javier came back with bags of Thai food from a place on 7th Avenue, I pretended to be asleep. "Everything's fine," I murmured at dawn when she woke me up with a Starbucks coffee in hand, but in the guest bathroom mirror, a marble vanity with LED lights that illuminated like an operating room, I saw the marks. Tiny bruises, shaped like children's fingerprints, encircling my throat like a necklace of poisoned amethysts. The skin was swollen, sensitive to touch, purple like ripe plums about to burst, and when pressed, a sharp pain shot up to my temples. I covered myself with a silk scarf I found on the coat rack, one of Laura's, with a peacock print, and went out into the street, the October sun filtering through the yellow maple trees, pretending everything was normal. The next day was a blur of forced routine. I returned at 6 to help with dinner. Organic baked chicken with quinoa and steamed broccoli, recipes from Pinterest that Laura dictated to me over the phone. Mateo played in the playpen in the living room, a white mesh playpen with Montessori toys, unpainted wooden blocks, bamboo rattles, stacking them into unstable towers that he knocked down with enthusiastic claps, laughing with that gurgling sound that now made my blood run cold. I watched him from the kitchen island chopping onions that stung my eyes, but my gaze kept drifting to his little hands, chubby, with short nails dirty from the soil in the small backyard garden, where he had crawled that morning under the supervision of the Dominican maid who came on Tuesdays. Laura noticed my scarf during breakfast. Oatmeal with blueberries and toasted almonds, served in handmade ceramic bowls. "Elena, did you catch a cold? Is everything okay?" I smiled with lips that trembled like leaves in the wind, the cup of coffee burning my tongue. "Nothing. I tripped in the subway. I'm clumsy in these heels." She nodded, distracted by her laptop open to an investment spreadsheet, and Javier didn't even look up from the Wall Street Journal, sipping his espresso with a grunt. But Mateo was watching me. From his high chair with a silicone bib tied around his neck, he chewed on a mashed banana, yellow juice dripping down his chin like diluted pus. His eyes sparkled, fixed on me, and for an eternal second, I swore he smiled just for me. A slow curve on those pink lips, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp for his age. The hair on my arms stood on end, and I chopped the onion harder. The knife, a $150 Wusthof that Laura bragged about, splashing on the bamboo board. The second night arrived like a thick fog. I repeated the ritual, a bubble bath with Dr. Bronner's, fresh pajamas from the dryer, smelling of downy lavender fabric softener. A story from where the wild things are read in deep voices for the monsters. In the rocking chair, her weight sank into me like soft lead, and I turned off the light with a click that echoed like a gunshot in the silence. I waited, my heart a fist in my chest. It didn't take long. Her little fingers climbed up again, but this time with more audacity. Not just my neck, but slipping under the collar of my cotton blouse, a cheap H&M I bought at the outlet in Jersey, feeling my bony collarbone as if searching for a buried secret. She squeezed, and the pain was a white flash, not like a punch, but something more intimate, an invasion that left me breathless. His breathing in my ear was a constant hiss, now punctuated by soft snores, tearing pieces of my dreams away, fragments of my childhood in a Galician village where my father would squeeze my arm until it left marks for disobeying him. I woke up in a cold sweat, my nightgown clinging to my skin like a damp shroud, and I saw him, asleep, his thumb in his mouth, sucking greedily, his lips pursed around the tip. But my shoulder was burning, and when I pulled down my sleeve in the bathroom, I saw the marks. 4 red crescents, fingernails dug into soft flesh, dried blood and fine threads that smelled of iron and fear. I said nothing. How do you explain to a Park Slope mother with a Brooklyn Museum membership and mindfulness classes that her little angel suffocates you in your sleep? I kept going because the pay was good, $200 a night, plus tips and $20 bills that Javier left on the counter like crumbs. And because part of me, that masochist who cleaned other people's bathrooms for pennies, needed to believe it was a mistake, a clumsy game played by a child who misses his mother's warmth during 12-hour shifts. But on the 3rd day, while changing his diaper in the upstairs room, a beechwood changing table with a memory foam mattress, the veil was torn. He was lying on his back, his chubby bottom exposed to the cool air coming in through the half-open window, overlooking the community garden, where neighbors were pruning rose bushes in the midday sun. The used diaper smelled of that sour sweetness of baby urine mixed with Enfamil formula. And I worked quickly. Pampers, sensitive wet wipe, zinc oxide cream to prevent chafing, new diaper with adhesive strips that crinkled as they were fastened. All done, my king, I murmured, leaning down to kiss his forehead. But his little hands dug into my forearms like tempered steel hooks. His fingernails, dirty with soil from the garden, he had been digging in the sandbox that morning, pretending to be a paleontologist with his red plastic shovel, sank into my flesh, breaking the epidermis in hot spots that bled instantly, crimson drops sliding down my olive skin to my elbow. I tried to let him go. Mateo, stop, sweetheart. But he laughed, a bubbly gurgle that sounded like water gushing from a broken pipe in the basement, bubbling with white foam at the corners of his mouth, eyes narrowed in ecstasy. He writhed like a fish on a cutting board, his nails scratching my face, a deep red gash from my left cheek to my jaw, tearing the thin skin near my eye, blood spurting in thin, warm threads that dripped onto his round belly, painting it like a Pollock abstract canvas. The pain was blinding, a fire that clouded my vision, and I screamed, a guttural primal sound that bounced off the padded walls of the room like an echo of madness. I pushed her instinctively, his little body rolling onto the mattress with a soft plop, still laughing, kicking the air with chubby white legs like worms. I covered my face with my hands, feeling the sticky blood between my fingers, the burning like spilled acid, and ran to the adjoining bathroom, slamming the door with my shoulder. Laura came running from the study downstairs, alerted by the scream. What the hell happened, Elena? My God. She looked at me, horrified, as I stammered excuses between sobs. He slipped. He accidentally scratched him when he fell. The changing table is high. I bandaged the wound with gauze from the first aid kit, a Johnson & Johnson kit, complete with betadine antiseptic that stung like salt on raw flesh, smiling with trembling lips that tasted of blood, but inside, panic churned my guts like a knot of rusty wire, tangling in my intestines until I vomited into the porcelain sink, yellow bile splattering the mirror. She believed me, or wanted to believe me. Poor thing, he's in that exploratory stage, and gave me the rest of the day off with an extra $100 check for the scare. Mateo, from his playpen below, watched me with those bright eyes, licking his lips stained with my blood like a miniature vampire. That night, I didn't go. I took refuge in my Brooklyn apartment, vinyl blinds closed against the neon lights of the corner liquor store, with a bottle of cheap gin, a liter of Beefeater, $12 at the Korean deli, which I drowned in canned tonic water. I tried to sleep on my sagging mattress, with sheets that smelled of sweat and generic detergent, but every time I closed my eyes, I felt those little fingers on my neck, the hissing in my ear like an approaching subway train. I dreamed about him, Mateo climbing onto my chest in the rocking chair, little hands around my throat, squeezing until the world became a black tunnel dotted with real stars, not stickers, and I was drowning in a sea of carrot puree. I woke up screaming, my heart racing like a taxi during rush hour, and I FaceTimed my sister in Miami. Cece, I can't take it anymore. The boy, he hurts me. He scratches me. He squeezes me. She, with her platinum blonde hair and red acrylic nails, laughed at first, thinking it was a funny story. Elena, they're kids. They're just playing around. Scratches. Give him a timeout and that's it. But her laughter broke when I described the bruises, the bite mark that was still throbbing on my shoulder. Find another job, sister. It's not worth it for $25 an hour. Remember Galicia? Dad used to hit you and you kept cleaning the house. But it was worth it. Or so I repeated to myself like a mantra as I paid for the Uber ride back on Friday. The salary covered my debt to the bank, a loan for knee surgery that my crappy insurance didn't cover, and I had started saving for a cruise to the Bahamas, something I hadn't done since my ex left me with $5,000 in credit card debt and a broken heart in a Queens motel. On the fourth night, Chaos moved in as a permanent tenant. I rocked him in the rocking chair, his warm little body clinging to mine like a limpet, the rocking creaking in the silence broken only by the wail of a distant siren on Flatbush Avenue. I turned off the light and waited with bated breath. His hands explored me as I pretended to sleep, groping my sagging breasts under my worn cotton nightgown, an old Victoria's Secret, with lace yellowed from washing. He squeezed my nipples with childish viciousness, twisting them like the dials of an old radio, and the pain was like a nuclear explosion, broken glass digging into sensitive flesh, radiating to my armpit and back in waves of nausea. I stood still, paralyzed by terror and that irrational guilt of hurting an innocent baby, feeling his hot breath wet my collarbone, smelling sour formula milk and something deeper, like sweet rot fermenting in the depths of his immature stomach. His fingers didn't stop there. They moved down, slipping under the waistband of my pleated skirt, an old navy one, cheap but comfortable, feeling the soft flesh of my belly, the silvery stretch marks of births that never came to term, memories of bodies that refused to be born. He squeezed, digging his nails into the loose, wrinkled skin, tearing fine lines that bled warm, drops sliding down my hip onto the rocking chair cushion. He murmured in his sleep, babbling words. Mine. It hurts. Mine. And I bit my lower lip until copper flooded my mouth, hot tears rolling down my cheeks in salty furrows. It lasted an eternity, 30 minutes that stretched like rubber, until he finally relaxed, rolling to one side with a sigh. I laid him in the crib, with hands shaking like leaves in a gale, and locked myself in the master bathroom, the parents' bathroom, an Italian marble suite with a rain shower and monogrammed towels. I looked at myself in the full-length mirror, illuminated by LED bulbs that showed every wrinkle and dark circle, fresh bruises on my neck like a strangulation collar, scratches on my arms oozing clear pus, and now red marks on my breasts that throbbed like open wounds, swollen and purple nipples. I showered with scalding water, the handheld shower head massaging my skin until it reddened, rubbing myself with Laura's gel. An Aveda musk that didn't erase his scent, that sticky mixture of Johnson's baby powder and childish sweat impregnated in my pores like an olfactory tattoo. I called my therapist, a Cuban woman in the Bronx who charged $50 per Zoom session, but I only left her a shaky voicemail. Dr. Ruiz, I can't. The boy, he touches me. It hurts. I didn't wait for a response. Instead, I took 2 Tylenol PMs stolen from the medicine cabinet and curled up on the living room couch until dawn, the TV murmuring a marathon of Law and Order, SVU that made me jump at every commercial break. The following days were a maze of pretense and exhaustion. Laura noticed the bandages, Band-Aid adhesive gauze, now yellowed with betadine, the increasingly elaborate scarves, the excuses that frayed like my patience. "Elena, are you sure everything's okay? You look exhausted, pale as a ghost." I smiled, serving her kale and protein smoothie in a recycled glass cup, my hands shaking so much that the liquid splashed onto the granite countertop. "It's subway jet lag, ma'am, and autumn pollen. I'm allergic." Javier, more perceptive, cornered me one day in the kitchen while I was loading the Miele dishwasher. "If the boy bothers you, tell me straight up. We can send him to daycare in the park." But Mateo wasn't bothering me. He attacked with the precision of a miniature surgeon. In Prospect Park that afternoon, an impromptu picnic with cashmere blankets and Whole Foods sandwiches. As I pushed him on the rusty chain swing, his little hands stretched back like tentacles, grabbing my hair in a chubby fist and pulling with superhuman strength for his size. Locks of my hair, brown, fine, with premature gray, were left in his palm, and I screamed, the swing squeaking like a cat in heat. A jogging mother in a Lululemon tracksuit approached, AirPods dangling. "Everything okay here?" "Yes, he was playing tickle," I lied while he laughed, the autumn wind whipping his curls like a crown of golden thorns, eyes fixed on my pain. The nights became a ritual of meticulous terror, each one escalating in intimacy and cruelty. The fifth. In the bathtub, he scratched my legs as I soaped him, nails digging into my inner thighs until they left parallel grooves that bled into the water, staining it a diluted pink like a bloody cocktail, and I held him by the armpits, his skin slippery against my palms, stifling nausea. The sixth. In the rocking chair, his fingers slipped into my mouth, open from yawning, pressing my fleshy tongue until I swallowed my own blood, the metallic taste drowning me like a river of rust, and I touched my palate with my tongue to feel the cut, a half-centimeter gash that throbbed. The seventh. She squeezed my breast with renewed viciousness, twisting my nipples until I felt something break inside. A milk duct, perhaps, a dull pain that doubled me over, silent tears soaking her hair. Each time, I remained still at first, paralyzed by paralyzing fear and that inherited Catholic guilt. "Don't hurt the child, Elena. He's the Son of God." But the panic grew like a tide, a knot in my stomach that couldn't be undone with chamomile tea or late-night calls to my sister, who now scolded me. "Quit, you idiot. Do you want to end up in the ER like the neighbor in 4B? I started taking precautions. A pocket knife, a red Swiss Army knife inherited from my grandfather, hidden in the lining of my bag, extra bandages in my backpack, and pepper spray from the corner store, in case of a crazy person on the subway. Just for cutting apples, I lied to myself, as I sharpened the blade in the kitchen in secret. On the 8th night, the air was charged with static electricity. A storm was brewing over the Hudson, and distant thunder rumbled like war drums. I cradled it, its weight now familiar as a chain, and turned off the light with my heart in my throat. His hands came quickly, wrapping completely around my neck, thumbs pressing down on my windpipe with increasing force, not the clumsy play of before, but a deliberate stranglehold. The air was cut off abruptly. I gasped, a raspy sound like gravel in my throat, and my nails dug into his wrists. Soft pink skin, now marked by my previous scratches, like a map of revenge. But he didn't let up. On the contrary, his little body arched against mine, using the rocking chair as leverage to squeeze deeper. Eyes open in the darkness, he wasn't asleep. He was pretending the little devil, bright as coins in the well of his soul, fixed on my contorted face. The world narrowed to a black tunnel lined with blood red. The hiss of his breathing now a deafening roar in my ears, drowning out the pounding of rain against the windows. I felt life ebbing away in waves, tingling in my fingers and toes, my heart beating erratically like a failing engine. Fragmented visions. My empty apartment in Brooklyn. The cruise to the Bahamas vanishing like smoke. My ex's face laughing in the motel. I thought about screaming, about hitting, but my survival instinct, forged by years of subtle abuse, guided me. My right hand, miraculously free, fumbled for the bag on the floor, slipping on the polished wood. I found it, numb fingers feeling the cold metal of the knife. I didn't pull it out to hurt him, God forbid, but as a lever. I pressed the handle against his thin forearm, twisting with all the strength of my desperation, a torque that cracked his bone like a green branch breaking. Mateo let out a scream, a sharp, piercing shriek that pierced the night like shattering glass, thunder and crying merging into a cacophony of sound, and I finally breathed in, air burning my lungs like pure brandy. I rolled off the rocking chair in a tangle of limbs, falling to the floor with a dull thud that shook the oak boards, the knife slipping from my hand and sliding under the crib like a fleeing snake. Mateo sat up on the mattress, not crying in pain but roaring with rage, little hands extended toward me like claws that gurgle now a furious babble. No, mine, die. I crawled across the room on all fours, the Persian rug cushioning my bruised knees, and reached the door, staggering down the stairs in the darkness. The brownstone a maze of shadows that smelled of panic and storm. In the living room, the landline phone, a retro AT&T model on the mahogany table, was my salvation. I dialed 911 with fingers that wouldn't obey, broken nails digging into my palm, my voice broken into a hoarse whisper. Help! The boy is killing me. 456 Carroll Street, Park Slope. Come now, for God's sake. The operator, a calm Brooklyn voice with an Italian accent, asked for details. Age, weapons. But I just repeated the address, panic a torrent drowning me again, sobs broken like the hiccups of a drowning man. The ambulance arrived in 8 minutes, sirens wailing like banshees in the rainy night, strobe lights painting the walls flashing blue and red, neighbors poking their heads out in flannel robes. Paramedics in navy blue uniforms burst through the half-open door, boots trampling the welcome mat, finding me curled up on the kitchen floor, scarf torn, dried blood on my face and neck, gasping like a wounded animal. Ma'am, breathe. What happened? I told them fragments. The boy, strangulation, knife. As they went upstairs and found Mateo semi-conscious on the floor, a bruise blooming on his temple where his head had hit the crib rail in the fall, scratch marks on his arm like reciprocal revenge. They carried him on a pediatric stretcher, his little body wrapped in a thermal blanket, gurgling weak protests, eyes half open, fixed on me with pure hatred that made a young paramedic, a guy from Queens with tattoos on his forearms, cross himself surreptitiously. Laura and Javier arrived in a yellow cab from a networking event in Midtown, summoned by the NYPD, who cordoned off the street with yellow tape, rain pattering on the puddles like bullets. Laura collapsed into hysterical sobs when she saw her son on the stretcher, kneeling on the wet pavement, Javier pale as sour milk, holding her as he questioned the officers. What the hell happened here? A robbery. The police, 2 detectives from the 78th Precinct, one with a gray mustache and gold badge, the other a Latina woman with tight braids, took my statement in the back of the ambulance, a flashlight illuminating my throat marked like a topographical map of violence. Mrs. Rivera, are you sure about this? He's a 3-year-old. Drugs. An intruder. I showed them the injuries, bruises, scratches, the bite on his shoulder now infected and oozing, and the knife recovered by a uniformed officer wearing latex gloves, its blade stained with the child's blood. They called the pediatrician on duty at New York Presbyterian, who examined Mateo in the ambulance. Mild concussion, sprained forearm, but nothing broken. However, when they woke him up with aromatic salts, he didn't cry for his mother. He looked for me with his eyes from the opposite stretcher and smiled, a slow, calculated smile, pearly teeth gleaming under the lights, causing the female paramedic to murmur a prayer in Spanish. They took me to Brooklyn Methodist Hospital, a glass and steel tower on the edge of Park Slope, with nasal oxygen that scraped my nostrils and intravenous morphine painkillers that lulled me into a dreamless gray limbo. I woke up in a private room, courtesy of my parents' insurance, which covered work-related incidents, with tubes in my arm and monitors beeping like electronic crickets. The next day, Laura visited me alone, gaunt beneath her bobby brown makeup, her bob undone and dark circles under her eyes like plow furrows. "Elena, I'm so sorry. We had no idea." It turns out that Mateo had been a difficult baby since birth, colic that lasted entire nights, epileptic tantrums at the Montessori daycare on the street, an incident months ago where he had bitten a temporary nanny, requiring stitches in her hand. But they attributed it to the terrible twos, post-pandemic home office stress, and undiagnosed lactose intolerance. The hospital's child psychiatrist, an Indian man from New Jersey wearing a turban and a stethoscope around his neck, diagnosed after evaluations reactive attachment disorder with traits of incipient antisocial behavior disorder, possibly genetic. The paternal grandfather had been a violent alcoholic in his youth, according to medical records. "It's extremely rare at this age," he explained to the parents at a meeting that Laura recounted to me over the phone, her voice breaking like glass. "Environmental factors, prolonged separation due to work, perhaps prenatal trauma. He needs immediate hospitalization and intensive cognitive behavioral therapy." Mateo did not return to the brownstone. He was transferred to the child psychiatry unit at NYU Langone in Manhattan, a sterile white ward with foam-padded walls, soft silicone sensory toys that don't break, and therapeutic play sessions with dolls that talk about emotions. Laura told me this during daily visits, bringing me smoothies from Juice Press and apologies wrapped in $500 checks, her voice breaking. "He's stable on risperidone, but he doesn't talk much, he just draws. Hands, always hands, squeezing necks. Throats bruised like yours." From my hospital bed, with Egyptian cotton sheets and views of the Brooklyn skyline, I felt a guilty relief that ate away at me like acid. I was saved. His little hands didn't strangle me completely. The knife as a providential lever, my desperate twist. But they marked me forever. Now I sleep with the light on my iPhone on. I avoid shopping carts at Whole Foods. And when I see blonde curls in the park, panic rises like bile, a knot tightening my own throat. I formally resigned a week later with a workers' comp claim that Javier's lawyer, a shark from a white shoe firm on Wall Street, settled for $15,000 in compensation for psychological trauma, plus a letter of recommendation that I burned without reading. I returned to my apartment in Brooklyn, but the Park Slope brownstone haunts me in recurring nightmares. The rocking chair, creaking alone in the dark, the hiss of his breathing like an eternal subway, those eyes like coins in a bottomless well, waiting for me to fall. Mateo left the hospital after 3 months with a vest of medication and weekly therapy at a center for special children in the Bronx. But I heard rumors from the Dominican maid who now cleans the brownstone, gossiping at the corner deli, that the tantrums had returned, more ferocious, with bites to therapists and drawings of bad ants being strangled. Now he is 4 years old, and his parents have enrolled him in a therapeutic boarding school in suburban Connecticut, far from nannies and rocking chairs, surrounded by children with similar diagnoses on a campus fenced like a fortress. I, Elena Rivera, the nanny who survived the angel with claws, walk the cobblestone streets of Brooklyn with an eternal scarf around my neck. A cashmere one, a gift from Laura. Remembering that in this city of broken dreams, even the smallest ones can drown yours in a gurgling whisper. The cruise to the Bahamas finally materialized, a solitary trip on a carnival ship with cramped cabins and endless buffets. But in the pool, under the Caribbean sun, I still feel ghosts. Sticky little fingers climbing my skin, a whistle in the salty wind. And I wonder, on sleepless nights facing the Hudson, if I will ever be able to cradle someone without seeing bruises in the mirror. My name is Carla, and in that relentless fall of 2023, at 32 years old, I was little more than a wandering specter on the cracked sidewalks of Bushwick, Brooklyn. My existence was reduced to a claustrophobic apartment in a red brick building from the 1920s, leaning like a drunken corpse against the salty winds of the East River, with walls that oozed perpetual dampness that seeped into my bones like a slow poison, and a constant stench of spicy curry and marijuana smoke rising from the Indian tenants on the floor below, mingling with the miasma of my own despair. My life was a vortex of fleeting and humiliating jobs, freelance babysitting through apps like Care.com and closed Facebook groups like NYC Babysitters Network, where mothers from Park Slope and Williamsburg sought reliable and discreet caregivers for $20 an hour, as if we were disposable commodities. It wasn't the fate I had envisioned. I had devoured pages of comparative literature at NYU Tisch, dreaming of essays on Poe's abysses published in the Paris Review, of novels that would dissect the human soul like a scalpel on raw flesh. But divorce had skinned me alive. My ex, a failed artist from Queens, took the remnants of our shared debts and left me with a stray cat named Poe, a skinny, elusive animal with yellow eyes that scratched the threadbare curtains at night, as if trying to tear the veil between wakefulness and nightmare. Caring for other people's children, those warm, slobbery bundles of borrowed innocence, paid the rent that the landlord hammered on my door with bounced checks, the electric bills that flashed like accusing eyes in the dim light, and the weekly sessions with the therapist at Brooklyn Hospital Center, a stoic woman of Haitian descent who prescribed me generic antidepressants for the anxiety that constricted my chest like a skeletal hand, cold and persistent, squeezing until air became a denied luxury. It was a Thursday in October, one of those days when the New York sky closes like a coffin lid, thick and oppressive with leaden clouds that devour the evening light, leaving the streets strewn with dry leaves that crunched underfoot like tiny bones, trampled in a forgotten ritual, and a premonitory smell of ozone that penetrated to the bone, promising floods that would wash away the sins of the city, but not mine. I was returning on the J train from a failed interview at an indie bookstore in Williamsburg. "You don't fit our curated aesthetic," they snapped at me with condescending smiles, their geometric tattoos glowing under the LED lights like marks of a secret brotherhood, when my phone vibrated in my pocket like a trapped insect. I checked the cracked screen and saw the ad in the Brooklyn Nannies and Sitters group. Babysitter wanted for tonight, 2 children, ages 6 and 8. Shift from 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. Cash payment $300. House in Park Slope. Contact Laura and Martin. The accompanying photo was an omen disguised as innocence. A 3-story townhouse with a brownstone facade eroded by decades of fog and industrial smoke. Front yard strangled by withered rose bushes with thorns curved like butcher hooks and vines climbing the walls like swollen, pulsing veins, and a crooked for sale sign hanging from a rusty post, faded letters that seemed to whisper, "For sale, lost souls." The WhatsApp number was below, and something in me, perhaps the exhaustion that clouded my vision with a gray veil, perhaps the visceral desperation for the $1,200 check that the landlord had nailed to my door that morning with a hammer, like an execution edict, prompted me to type with clumsy fingers. "Hi, I'm Carla. I have experience with children. Available tonight. Details." The reply came in seconds, as if an invisible eye had been watching me from the digital darkness. "Hi, Carla. Perfect. The kids are quiet. They'll be asleep when you arrive. Just watch them. Don't bother them. Address, 456 Carroll Street, Apt 5A. We'll be waiting for you at 9, Laura." Attached was an audio file, a woman's voice, soft as silk, torn by sharp nails, with a neutral East Coast accent that could belong to any Manhattan yuppie or a whispering specter in an abandoned sanatorium. "Carla, thank you for responding so quickly. Martin and I have a gala at the Met tonight. One of those evenings where the rich pretend to empathize with the dead arts. The children, Sophia and Thomas, are little angels. Or they were. They don't make a sound. They sleep like fallen logs in an enchanted forest. If anything happens, and it won't, call me at 555 issues. Remember, silence is sacred. It sounded idyllic, an oasis in the desert of my precariousness. Too idyllic, perhaps, with that exorbitant payment for a night of passive surveillance. But I ignored the knot in my stomach that twisted like a nest of snakes. That whispering voice that reminded me how my ex had promised me paradise before dragging me into the abyss of debt, sleepless nights, and invisible bruises on my soul. I arrived at 8:50, sweat sticking to my floral dress, a discounted H&M one that I had steam ironed that afternoon in the tiny bathroom of my apartment, now wrinkled and clinging to my skin like a treacherous second epidermis. My feverish body, my purse crossed over my chest like a precarious talisman with the essentials. A children's storybook, Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, with its toothy, hairy monsters that now seem to me like pale caricatures of deeper horrors. My iPhone, with 100% battery and cracked case. A half-empty bottle of Fiji water that tasted like stale plastic. And the pepper spray I bought at a deli in Bed-Stuy after reading in the Post about muggings in Park Slope, where the rich leave their doors ajar for thieves who steal not only jewelry, but innocence. Carroll Street was a tunnel of Victorian wrought iron streetlights casting long, distorted shadows like skeletal fingers reaching out from the sewers. Parked cars with New Jersey license plates gleaming in the gibbous moonlight like the eyes of predators, and the smell of charred hot dogs from a street cart floating in the humid air, mixed with the rotten sweetness of autumn leaves crushed under tires. The building at 456 took my breath away. A 4-story brownstone with wrought iron balconies that creaked in the wind like rusty coffin hinges. A glass doorman's window fogged with ghostly fingerprints. And an ancient elevator that groaned like a dying man as it opened its jagged doors. The doorman, a man bent like a weeping willow with a graying mustache and a blue uniform frayed at the elbows, looked me up and down with watery, bloodshot eyes, as if he saw not a living woman, but a wandering soul summoned by mistake. For 5A, yes, go up, girl. The lady is waiting for you. But be careful. That house has echoes. Echoes that don't stop even at dawn. The elevator was a vertical tomb. It smelled of ancient mold and something deeper, a rancid sweetness like wilted roses rotting in a forgotten vase in a dusty attic, the metal walls scratched with scribbles that looked like nails clawing in panic. I pressed the button for the 5th floor with a slightly trembling finger and rose slowly, my stomach churning in spirals of nausea that I attributed to the rattling of the subway and the sour coffee I had swallowed on the platform. The 5th floor hallway was a narrow, oppressive corridor of faded, matted red carpet, dotted with dark, indefinite stains that looked like footprints from shoes damp with diluted blood, with doors numbered on opaque, corroded brass plates, and wall lights that flickered intermittently with a low electrical hum, casting shadows that contorted like living entities on the walls cracked by fine cracks like broken veins. 5A was at the end of the hallway, the door ajar just a few inches, a sliver of sickly yellow light seeping through like pus, oozing from an infected wound that refuses to close. I rang the bell with my knuckle, a hollow, reverberating ding-dong that echoed like an echo in an empty crypt, and a woman opened the door abruptly, as if she had been lurking behind the wood with her ear pressed against it, breathing in my arrival. It was Laura, I suppose, in her 40s but weathered like parchment exposed to the sun, skeletal like a disjointed mannequin in an abandoned antique shop, with jet black hair pulled back into a bun so tight it pulled at her pale, waxy skin, accentuating the fine wrinkles around her sunken eyes, and a tight blood-red dress that outlined her prominent ribs like the bars of an internal cage and bony hips that creaked when she moved. Her eyes were a dull leaden gray, cold as the blade of a rusty scalpel under the dim light of an unused operating room, and her smile was a slanted crack in a cracked porcelain mask, not reaching the corners of her bloodless chapped lips, as if the gesture required superhuman effort. "Carla, come in. The clock has already marked your arrival. Destiny does not wait for the latecomers." The apartment was a mausoleum of opulence and terminal decline, a vast cavernous room with dark mahogany furniture carved in twisted Gothic motifs, wingback chairs upholstered in threadbare, faded velvet that smelled of rancid mothballs and moldy pipe smoke, as if Victorian ghosts had breathed their last breaths there. Heavy curtains of crimson brocade and faded gold that viciously blocked the gibbous moon, filtering only a silvery ghostly glow that tinged everything with a dull poisonous blue, like the skin of a drowned man rising to the surface. The air was thick with a cloying, suffocating scent. Melted candle wax in bronze candelabra with deformed cherub figures, mixed with something underlying and visceral, a sweet metallic stench that clung to the tongue like chemical residue, reminding me of my grandmother's funeral home in Flushing, Queens, where formaldehyde seeped into the nostrils like an elixir of preserved death, and the hum of the air conditioning fought in vain against the miasma of bodies that refused to forget their breath. Martin was slumped on the main sofa like an obese, decadent Buddha, a voluminous man in a pearl gray suit, wrinkled and stained at the lapels like skin wrinkled by premature aging, a loose silk tie around a fleshy, sweaty neck marked by bulging veins pulsing like worms underground, smoking a blonde cigarette in a yellowed tortoiseshell holder that filled the room with dense, spiraling blue wisps, a toxic fog that stung the eyes and tangled in the throat like smoke from an underground fire. "Hello, babysitter," he growled in a deep, hoarse voice, like gravel scraping the bottom of a pine coffin without getting up, his bloodshot eyes veiled by heavy eyelids fixed on me like those of a blind predator assessing the heat of its prey in the dark. He held out a yellowed, crumpled manila envelope, sealed with red wax imprinted with an arcane symbol, a stylized eye inside a triangle, and as he tore it open, the paper crackled like dry parchment. $300 in cash, as promised. Half now, half at dawn, if you manage to watch over their sleep without waking them, or being devoured by it. His fingers brushed mine as he handed it to me, cold and slimy like the guts of a skinned fish, with yellowed, chipped nails that scratched my skin lightly, leaving red grooves that burned like premonitions, and a chill ran down my spine, branching out into my limbs like roots of ice, as if I were touching not living flesh, but the cold membrane of something that had once been human. "The children are in their room," whispered Laura, her breath exhaling a minty, bitter breath, like stale absinthe distilled from poisonous herbs, as she led me down a side hallway flanked by paintings framed in tarnished and corroded gold, sepia portraits of Victorian children with large, hollow eyes like abandoned mine shafts, gazes that followed your movement with mechanical persistence, as if the painter had captured not innocent souls, but light-devouring voids, mute mouths screaming in eternal silence. "Sophia and Thomas have been asleep since 7 o'clock. Don't disturb them, understand? They are fragile to noise, like fine glass about to shatter into 1,000 fragments that cut the skin when they fall. If they wake up, and fate decrees that they will not, give them only water from the thermos on the nightstand, warm like the breast milk that no longer flows. No bright lights to burn their eyelids, no caresses to break the veil. Just watch, Carla. Watch as sleep envelops them, eternal and unbreakable." He didn't show me the room. He just pointed a bony finger at a door at the end of the hallway, ajar just a finger's width, from which emanated a thread of absolute palpable darkness, a void that absorbed sound like a black hole devouring stars, exhaling a cold, damp breath that smelled of turned earth and something else, the salt of unshed tears. Martin then stood up with a crackling of joints, like old bones fitting into rusty sockets, stubbing out his cigarette in a carved glass ashtray shaped like a smiling skull, a detail that pierced my brain like a splinter, the skull laughing with translucent glass teeth that reflected my distorted, pale face, eyes dilated in my reflection like those of a damned soul. Anything, call us. But remember, silence is your ally, and your executioner tonight. They left without effusive goodbyes, without kisses on the forehead that left traces of life, the front door closing with a metallic and definitive click that echoed like the bolt of a cell in a forgotten basement, leaving an echo that vibrated in my ribs and sank into the floor like a nail into rotten wood. I was left alone in the oppressive living silence, a void that was not absence, but an evil presence, an invisible weight that rested on my shoulders like raven's wings. The ticking of the pendulum clock in the living room was a sadistic hammering in my temples, irregular and accusatory. Tick, tock, tick, tock, tick, as if counting not fleeting seconds, but the agonizing beats of a mechanical heart that refused to stop, accelerating in crescendos of panic and decelerating in valleys of fatal resignation. I made tea in the adjoining kitchen, a rusty greenish copper pot with a porcelain sugar bowl, cracked like a smiling skull. But the tap water was cloudy and viscous, with a metallic, earthy taste reminiscent of blood diluted in rust and mass grave clay. So I left it to cool on the black granite countertop, stained with dark, indefinite circles, like marks from glasses forgotten for decades. Residues of liquids that had evaporated but left behind their poisonous essence. I tried to read in the living room to anchor myself to normality, where the wild things are, with its roaring savage beasts that now seemed to me like childish caricatures of primordial horrors, creatures with serrated teeth that devoured not only children, but also the sanity of those who contemplated them. But the words blurred on the page under the dim light of a floor lamp with a yellowed parchment shade, and my eyes were inexorably drawn to the hallway door, attracted by an invisible magnetic force. An hour passed. Nothing. Not a whisper of a child's sleep murmured in the darkness, not a creak of a mattress under a living weight, not the subtle rustle of sheets against warm skin. Only the wind scratching at the windows with spectral nails, a low, persistent moan that seemed to come not from outside, but from the walls themselves, and the distant drip of a faucet in the guest bathroom, like eternal tears falling into a cracked porcelain sink, each drop an echo of muffled sobs. At 11 o'clock, the silence became a physical, suffocating weight, a leaden blanket pressing down on my chest until every breath was an effort, the air entering lungs that felt like perforated membranes. I paced the room in hypnotic circles, my bare feet sinking into the frayed and moldy Persian rug. Loose, tangled threads that wrapped around my toes like blind tentacles seeking anchorage, fibers impregnated with a smell of mold and something animal, like rotten rat hair, stepping carefully so as not to wake. What? Shadows stirring in the corners. The walls were covered with photos framed in gilded but tarnished Victorian frames, covered with a patina of dust that clung to my fingers like ritual ash. Laura and Martin at a wedding in torrential rain that blurred the faces of the guest, smiles with teeth too white and uniform, eyes sunken into sockets as dark as open graves. A cruise in Bermuda, with champagne glasses reflecting distorted and blurred faces, as if the photographer had captured reflections of drowned souls. And then the children, omnipresent like curses. Sophia and Thomas, aged 6 and 8 according to the announcement, which now seemed to me like a poisoned lure. She, with straight, greasy blonde pigtails like strands of dirty cotton soaked in cold sweat, and an immaculate white dress that looked like a child's shroud sewn with silver thread, her posture rigid like a wax doll about to melt. He, with straight black hair stuck to his pale forehead, beaded with sweat, brown eyes sunk into dark purplish sockets, clutching a threadbare teddy bear with a button eye hanging by a frayed thread as if the toy itself were mortally wounded and begging for mercy. In all the photos, their gazes were empty and devouring, pupils dilated in an eternal void that absorbed the light of the flash, as if the photographer had captured not moments of joy, but holes in the fabric of reality, mute mouths open in screams that the paper could not record. I approached one in particular, on the mantelpiece of the cold, unlit fireplace, like a desecrated altar. The silver frame was cold to the touch, a cold that seeped into my skin like an injection of Novocaine, covered with a fine, grayish dust that clung to my fingers like ashes from a recent funeral, leaving a residue that smelled of acrid smoke and charred flesh on a distant pyre. "Are you okay, kids? Can you hear me?" I whispered to the fogged glass, feeling ridiculous and prophetic at the same time, the reflection of my pale face superimposed on theirs like a ghost on graves. But the hallway now seemed to stretch out, an illusory tunnel elongated by the flickering light, the shadows of the floor lamps lengthening like black, slimy tongues licking the floor toward the door at the end, where the crack had widened by an imperceptible millimeter, like the mouth of a corpse swelling in the early stages of decay, exhaling a breath that now reached the room, sweet, floral, and nauseating, like roses buried alive, midnight. The air had thickened into a palpable soup, laden with a stench that seeped from the cracks in the floor and the joints in the walls like smoke from an underground fire in the city's catacombs. Sweet at first, like mint candies melted under an unholy sun and forgotten in a drawer, but evolving hour by hour into something more nauseating and visceral, a putrid bouquet of chemical formaldehyde and gaseous decomposition, the unmistakable smell of bodies in early decomposition seeping into the lungs like a toxic gas, reminding me with cruel precision of my grandmother's funeral home in Flushing, where the air conditioning hummed in vain against the miasma of death, and the formaldehyde mingled with the sweetness of flesh surrendering, swelling into pockets of gas pressing against the skin from within. I covered my nose with the sleeve of my dress, the cotton fabric absorbing the stench like a thirsty sponge, but it permeated my skin, my tangled hair, an invisible and persistent perfume that made me cough up dry, bitter retches, my palate covered with a metallic residue as if I had licked rusty coins. I tried to sleep on the wing-back sofa to escape wakefulness. The leather creaked under my weight, like dry skin cracking in a desert, smelling of stale tobacco and old male sweat, impregnated with pheromones of past panic, and I covered myself with a moldy wool blanket from the hallway closet, rough as sandpaper against my sensitive skin, with dust balls and something more organic, fine blonde hairs tangled in the fibers like strands from a nest abandoned by rats, or worse, by small hands that had woven their desperation into the fabric. But sleep was a luxury denied, a mirage that dissipated when I closed my eyes. Instead, the noises came, subtle at first but accumulating like drops in a barrel until they overflowed into chaos. A distant raspy whisper at first, like dry leaves brushing against the parquet floor in a non-existent wind inside the sealed house. Then a soft, rhythmic tapping from the kitchen, like small nails drumming on a cracked porcelain sink, insistent and hypnotic, accelerating like a feverish pulse. I jumped up, my heart pounding in my chest, with enough force to splinter my ribs, and checked with the light from my cell phone, trembling in my sweaty hand, the white beam cutting through the darkness like a scalpel. The sink was dry and dusty, the faucet dripping a single translucent, oily drop that evaporated upon touching the ceramic with a hiss, leaving a sticky, yellowish residue that smelled like stagnant urine and fermented syrup in the depths of a flooded basement. But on the rusty wired drainer, a child's cup, faded blue plastic with dinosaur designs, erased by time and use, as if they had been licked by eager tongues, was precariously overturned. And as I straightened it with trembling fingers, A viscous thread of yellowish liquid spilled slowly onto the countertop, dripping onto the floor with a plop-plop that echoed like wax tears. The fluid smelling like an unholy mixture of sour apple juice and something else, like childish bile and the treacherous sweetness of early decomposition. I returned to the sofa with jelly legs, but now the ticking of the clock seemed to mock me openly, a sadistic chorus of rusty gears, tick-tock, 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 accelerating in paroxysms of fury and decelerating in valleys of fatal resignation, measuring not linear time, but the threads of my sanity unraveling one by one, like a tapestry embroidered with exposed nerves. 1 o'clock in the morning. The stench intensified in waves, seeping in from the hallway like smoke from a slow fire in the bowels of the house, enveloping me in an invisible fog that stung my eyes like diluted acid and scraped my throat with invisible particles, as if the air were saturated with toxic mold spores. I walked barefoot into the hallway, the carpet pricking my heels like invisible hypodermic needles, each step an effort against a gravity that seemed to pull me back with invisible claws, the floor undulating subtly beneath my feet like the skin of a living animal breathing. The children's door was ajar a little more. The crack, a black pulsating abyss that devoured the light from my cell phone, exhaling a cold, damp breath that made the hairs on the back of my neck and arms stand on end, an internal wind that smelled of earth turned from a fresh grave and the salt of unshed tears, mixed with the cloying sweetness of candy forgotten in a sealed drawer. Sophia. Thomas. Are you okay? Can you hear me in the dark? I whispered, my voice a broken, trembling thread lost in the void, amplified by the silence like a scream drowned in black water, bouncing off the walls like an echo of madness. Nothing. A silence so absolute and oppressive that I heard the hum of my own blood in my ears, the dull thud of my heart like a distant drum in a flooded cavern, and deeper, an underlying murmur like the gurgling of gas in inert intestines. I pushed the door with my fingertips, and the hinges groaned a low, drawn-out lament, a wounded animal's howl in the darkness that spread down the hallway like ripples in a pool of mercury. The room was a cube of absolute, tangible blackness, heavy black velvet curtains drawn to the floor like shrouds sewn with shadow thread, blocking the gibbous moon that bathed Park Slope in a spectral and malevolent silvery glow. A table lamp on the nightstand turned off and covered with a layer of thick dust that danced in the stagnant air like specks of dirty snow in a winter storm, and 2 single beds against the back wall, separated by a narrow claustrophobic space that smelled of vegetable mold and something more primal, of damp earth removed from a makeshift grave. The air here was a stale, sticky syrup thick as rotten molasses, as if it had been sealed in an airtight vacuum chamber days ago, laden with microscopic particles that stuck to the tongue when inhaled, a metallic, salty taste reminiscent of coagulated blood in the mouth of a dying man. I crawled closer, the hard wooden floor creaking under my knees, like vertebrae splintered in a fatal fall, invisible splinters digging into my skin, and I felt for the switch on the wall with a trembling finger. A sharp, definitive click, and the central light bulb, a frosted glass lampshade hanging from the ceiling like a funeral bell in a desecrated cathedral, flickered once, twice, 3 times with an electric buzz that echoed like a swarm of angry flies before settling into a sickly, bilious ochre glow, yellowish like the light of a lantern in an abandoned mine tunnel, casting grotesque, elongated shadows on the walls papered with patterns of withered, thorny vines, like dry, twisted veins, climbing toward the ceiling in an attempt to strangle the light itself. There they were, exposed in their unholy immobility. Sophia and Thomas, lying on their twin beds like offerings on a pagan altar, covered by white sheets up to their necks, arranged in such a meticulous and ritualistic pose that it looked like the work of an obsessed taxidermist. hands crossed over their chests in a gesture of inverted prayer, heads tilted toward the half-open door as if they had died waiting for me in anticipation, faces oriented in eternal vigil. At first, my fractured mind clung to the desperate illusion of deep sleep, pale, serene faces under the dim glow, with long, dark eyelashes casting elongated shadows on cheeks sunken like lunar craters, excavated by invisible pain, lips parted in a sigh that never quite exhaled. But horror seeped in, slowly and inexorably, like poison injected into a main vein, revealing the truth in layers of nightmare. Sophia's chest was a flat, motionless plane beneath the sheet, without the subtle rise and fall of a child's breath, without the radiant warmth that emanates from a living body at rest, only a cold void that absorbed the heat of my proximity like a thermal well. Thomas's eyes were half open in glassy, perpetual slits, not closed in the innocence of sleep, but open in a rictus of petrified terror, pupils dilated into black, unfathomable wells that absorbed the light from the bulb without reflecting it. Whites injected with red by fine hemorrhagic petechias like bloody cobwebs, and dry tears tracing crystallized furrows on his temples, like rivers of salt frozen in a desert of bloodless skin. I approached Sophia first, my heart an anvil forged in my throat that prevented me from swallowing, each step a splash in the thick air, and I touched the edge of the sheet with my trembling fingertips. Cold, stiff as starched cardboard soaked in formaldehyde, with a slight crackle when moved, as if the fabric were impregnated with a coagulated viscous fluid that resisted touch. I lifted the edge slowly, inches at a time, in a ritual of revelation that made my pulse race to the point of vertigo, and the miasma hit me like a punch to the solar plexus. Its skin was grayish and translucent wax, marble-like on the cheeks where blue veins branched out like dead and arid deltas beneath the surface. A hydrographic map of dry and forgotten rivers that once carried life. The mouth, half open in a silent and eternal O, revealed cracked and bloodless lips, dehydrated like old parchment exposed to the desert wind, with fine cracks oozing a white, creamy residue like rancid cheese, and a thread of coagulated drool. Not the clear, sweet saliva of a sleeping child, but thick, yellowish mucus, like pus from an infected wound that refuses to heal, dripping onto the pillow in a hardened brownish puddle, surrounded by a swarm of tiny metallic flies buzzing lazily in the stagnant air, their translucent wings beating against the fabric with a low hum that resonated in my ears like a funeral choir. His hands, crossed in that pious and mocking pose, were swollen like deflated balloons about to burst. Plump fingers, now transformed into pale cyanotic sausages with nails blue from terminal hypoxia, and on the inner palms, fresh, deep marks from self-inflicted bites, perfect semicircles of infant teeth, sunk to the bone with jagged edges where the flesh had been torn away in life, leaving strands of dried black blood that smelled of rusty iron and pure terror, of panic that had solidified on the skin like cold lava. Under the sheet, her belly was a lump that was both sunken and distended, her navel a dark wrinkled depression, where the stench was more intense and visceral, incipient gaseous decomposition, a subtle swelling pressing against the fabric from within, hinting at methane and sulfur gases trapped in inert, putrid intestines. The first audible whisper of putrefaction that caused the sheet to arch slightly in irregular pulses, as if something alive, larvae perhaps, or the soul itself resisting, was stirring in the depths of her decomposing abdomen. I staggered backward, vomit rising in acidic waves up my esophagus like bile from an internal well, and stumbled over the edge of Thomas's bed, falling to my knees on the floor that now seemed sticky and treacherous, as if exuding an invisible, slippery oil of organic origin, a lubricant of death. I turned toward him with a muffled groan, that escaped my throat like steam from a volcanic fissure. The glow of the lamp casting his grotesque, elongated shadow on the opposite wall, a deformed giant with arms outstretched in supplication, head tilted at an impossible angle, and panic paralyzed me in a primal freeze. Muscles taut as cables about to snap. Merciful God, he was the epicenter of horror, the rotten core of the nightmare. His brown eyes, which in family photos looked like innocent wells of childish curiosity, were now milky orbs clouded by post-mortem opacity, pupils dilated into abysses of frozen, eternal terror, the whites injected with intense red by fine, branching hemorrhagic petechia like roots of blood beneath the conjunctiva, like bloody stars exploding in an agonizing night sky. Dried tears furrowed their cheeks in salty, crystallized channels, fine frost that crackled when touched, and their mouths were twisted into a grimace, not of peaceful sleep, but of a silenced, stifled scream, lips swollen and purple like ripe plums about to burst, with a thin, zigzagging cut on the lower lip where the blood had dried into a black, scaly crust, and the tongue visible, swollen and bruised like a strangled muscle, protruding slightly between the teeth in a final attempt to beg for air, to bite the hand that held it. The sheet over his torso was stained with an irregular dark oval, spreading like a flower of poisonous ink in murky, contaminated water, and when I touched it with my trembling hand, my fingers were soaked in a viscous liquid, cold as death syrup, a diluted blood serum that smelled of rancid copper and bile fermented in the depths of an empty stomach, dripping in long, elastic threads that clung to my skin like sticky, living cobwebs, resisting release. I lifted the fabric with a guttural groan that sprang from my diaphragm like a belch of horror, and the vomit exploded in a cathartic eruption, a hot, acidic, corrosive stream that splattered the floor in yellowish foamy puddles, mixing with the accumulated dust and the ambient stench in a nauseating soup that bubbled slightly, as if the floor itself were reacting with a life of its own. His chest was desecrated in an anatomical obscenity, not in a clean clinical surgeon's wound, but in an irregular savage gash, as if internal claws, the nails of a childish demon or adult hands wearing latex gloves, had torn the skin from the inside in a fit of prolonged and meticulous agony. Ribs exposed, white and splintered like branches of a dry tree split by lightning, splinters of bone embedded in the surrounding flesh, where the blood had coagulated into black, gelatinous clots, amorphous masses that came off with a wet sucking sound when touched. Beneath, a cavernous damp void, collapsed lungs, deflated like punctured and abandoned balloons, adhered to the rib cage in a fibrous gray-green mass, with patches of yellow pleural effusion dripping slowly like poisoned honey, and the heart, O God of absent mercy, the heart, still as a withered black fruit, shriveled into a wrinkled, crumpled fist, with veins and arteries cut into irregular sections dripping a yellowish, fetid, serous residue, a swollen pericardium beating not with life, but with accumulated gases. On the neck, symmetrical, flower-like bruises in the shape of adult hands, long, masculine fingers around the delicate throat, thumbs pressing on the windpipe in a deliberate and prolonged strangulation, leaving deep impressions of gold rings on the bruised and ecchymotic skin like seals of eternal possession. And just below the child's jaw, a fine, precise incision, surgical in its cruelty, about 2 centimeters long, from which flowed a dry black thread of coagulated blood, as if something vital and thick had been drained, an elixir of life stolen in a ritual sacrifice, the skin around it swollen into a bruise that spread like roots beneath the surface. His hands, like his sister's, were crossed in a gesture of failed supplication, but the nails were broken and bloody, splintered into irregular points with fragments of skin, not hers, but of the one who had held her in her final agony, foreign epidermis embedded beneath like microscopic trophies, silent witnesses and accusers of a desperate and asymmetrical struggle, nails that had scratched in vain at the flesh of the executioner. I fell backwards onto the floor, the impact reverberating through my spine like a whip. The world spinning in a vortex of nausea and uncontrollable crying, guttural convulsive sobs that shook my entire body, snot and tears mixing on my face in a sticky, salty mask, my breath coming in gasps that scraped my throat like ground glass. No, it can't be. God, please, wake up. Tell me it's a rotten dream. I babbled in a broken mantra, crawling toward the door in an animalistic, primitive panic, my nails digging into the carpet that now seemed alive and hostile, fibers tangling around my fingers like hungry roots from an underground forest, pulling me back with an illusory force. I looked up one last time in a spasm of desperation. On the opposite wall, an antique mirror with a tarnished and chipped gold frame reflected the abomination in all its grotesque splendor. Me, kneeling in my own bile and vomit. The children like fallen angels in a Renaissance nightmare canvas, white sheets stained like broken wings. And for an eternal, paralyzing moment, I swore I saw movement in the reflection, a tall, thin shadow materializing behind me. Laura's bony outline outlined in smoke, gray eyes shining like silver coins in the absolute darkness, lips moving in an inaudible whisper forming my name. But when I turned with a muffled scream that tore my throat, nothing. Only the throbbing emptiness and the buzzing of flies multiplying into a frenzied funeral chorus that filled the room like a requiem composed by devils, wings beating against my exposed skin like insect kisses. I pulled out my iPhone with hands that wouldn't obey me, fingers slippery on the screen from cold sweat, hot tears, and blood serum dripping from my palms in sticky threads, and dialed 911 with an epileptic tremor that caused the phone to fall twice to the floor, slipping in the puddle of vomit. Emergency. There are dead children, torn apart. Oh God, come now. 450 Carroll Street, Apt 5A, Park Slope. They're rotting, please, I screamed in a torrent of panic, my voice broken into fragments like trampled glass. The operator, her voice calm and professional with a Queen's accent tinged with chronic fatigue, guided me with words that sounded distant, as if from another world. Ma'am, take a deep breath. Tell me step by step. Stay calm. Don't touch anything else. The scene is sacred. Unit on the way. ETA 5 minutes. Stay on the line. But it was too late. Irrevocably too late. My fingerprints were imprinted on the crumpled sheet, on the splintered doorframe, on the very air I had inhaled and exhaled in gasps, contaminating the scene with my primal panic, my DNA woven into the tapestry of death like a red thread in a shroud. The police arrived in an apocalyptic whirlwind of wailing sirens that tore through the Brooklyn night like the wails of souls in torment. Blue and red, strobe lights bathing the hallway and street in a frantic, nauseating arterial pulse. Neighbors poking their disheveled heads in rumpled pajamas from half-open doors, curious eyes shining like rats in the dark. 2 NYPD officers burst in first like bulls in a china shop, burly, sweaty men in bulletproof vests that crackled like beetle shells, Glock semi-automatic pistols in quick-release holsters, maglite flashlights sweeping the shadows with white, blinding beams like swords of light, followed by detectives from the 78th Precinct, Inspector Lopez, a Latina woman with short black hair and eyes as hard as polished flint, wearing a black leather jacket that smelled of Marlboro cigarette smoke and stale machine coffee, and her partner Ruiz, a bearded, scruffy guy with a loose polyester tie and a cardboard folder under his arm stained with coffee rings. They found me curled up in the living room like a fetus in the fetal position, sobbing convulsions that shook my torso, the envelope of money crumpled in my clenched fist like a cursed throbbing talisman, $20 bills peeking out like accusing green tongues. Ma'am, What the hell happened here? Who the hell are you? Lopez snapped, his voice sharp as a blunt scalpel, kneeling down to my level with crackling nitrile gloves, while Ruiz secured the perimeter, with the radio crackling with static, like interference from hell. I told them everything in a feverish, disjointed torrent, between spasmodic hiccups and retching that doubled me over, the Facebook ad as a digital decoy, the WhatsApp chats that now seemed like messages from beyond the grave, the arrival under the gibbous moon, the oppressive silence that closed in like a trap, the discovery in the room like an apocalyptic revelation. I showed him the phone with trembling, stained hands, screenshots of the messages with Laura, the audio playing in a torturous loop. Her soft voice now a spectral mocking whisper. Don't bother them. Silence is sacred. The ad copied into notes with the photo of the townhouse that now looked like a portrait of an open grave. Ruiz confiscated it with a grunt, frowning under his graying beard. Burner number. Disposable prepaid. We're going to triangulate it with Verizon and the FBI. This smells like a setup from a mile away. They climbed to the room with heavy, deliberate steps that thundered like thunder in the narrow hallway, flashlights piercing the darkness like spears, and flashes from Canon DSLR cameras piercing the night like lightning in an underground storm, illuminating corners that the dim light had not touched. I heard their murmurs seeping through the hallway like toxic gas leaks, low, professional voices tinged with a visceral horror that seeped into the syllables. Manual strangulation in the minor, finger marks on the neck consistent with adult strength, incision in the male's carotid artery, post-mortem, precise as a surgeon, advanced rigor mortis, liver mortis on the back, liver spots, estimated time of death 48 to 72 hours, initial decomposition visible 2 days. The children had been in that limbo of slow decay for 2 days when I was hired to watch over their sleep. 2 days of accumulated gases and egg-laying flies in the stillness. Lopez came down with an ashen, emaciated face, his detective's mask cracked by a nervous tick in his jaw that made his teeth grind audibly. Carla, are you sure you didn't go in before? Didn't you see anything out of place? Anything that made your hair stand on end? I shook my head mechanically, fresh tears tracing hot grooves in the grime and sweat on my face. No. They told me to sleep, not to disturb them. That silence was sacred. They handcuffed me per standard protocol, the cold, jagged metal biting into my wrists like steel teeth, the cuffs creaking as they closed, and dragged me to the double-parked Ford Interceptor patrol car, the back seat smelling of stale sweat, drunken vomit, and chemical disinfectant, the lights of the townhouse shrinking in the rearview mirror like an evil blind eye closing forever. At the 78th Precinct Police Station, a gray windowless concrete bunker on Prospect Park West, smelling of burnt coffee in a thermos, harsh Lysol disinfectant, and human despair layered like geological strata. I relived the nightmare hour by hour in an interrogation room with a stainless steel table scratched like self-harm scars, and a bare light bulb hanging from the ceiling that buzzed like a swarm of angry wasps trapped in glass. I showed everything under the relentless, inquisitorial light, the advertisement printed on the police station photocopier on cheap paper that crinkled like dry skin when folded, the chats printed on A4 sheets with ink bleeding into the margins, the envelope with the money, crisp new $20 bills, serial numbers meticulously noted by Ruiz in a lined moleskin notebook, his bitten pencil leaving teeth marks on the cover. Look, Inspector, Laura's number, 5555666XX. Call it, please. You'll see I'm not lying. They did so from a landline in the corner of the room, the receiver crackling with static like interference from a digital beyond. A robotic, dehumanized voice replied, "The number you have dialed is no longer in service. If you feel you have reached this recording in error, please check the number and dial again." They tried to geolocate it with the NYPD cybercrime team, a nerd with foggy glasses typing furiously. Nothing. A digital ghost evaporated into the ether of anonymous servers. IP bounced through VPN in the Caymans. The ad had been deleted from the Facebook group hours after my response. The admin, a fake profile with a stock photo of a smiling, ethereal mother with pixelated eyes, suspended for suspicious activity that smacked of orchestration. The townhouse, owners absent for a month, sold at a forced mortgage auction to an anonymous LLC registered in the British Virgin Islands that did not respond to subpoenas or calls from Interpol. The real estate agent, a Manhattan has-been, who babbled about discreet foreign investors. Martin and Laura, identities fabricated in a deepfake laboratory, photos manipulated in Photoshop with metadata perfectly erased, like puppets in a shadow theater projected by an invisible puppeteer. It's a meticulous setup, Ruiz muttered, scratching his beard with a pencil chewed down to the eraser, leaving splinters of wood in his skin. They hired you to find them, to be the unwitting witness. Why? Why put a babysitter on the board? Part of a bigger game, or a message to someone like you? The autopsy report from the medical examiner's office in Brooklyn arrived at dawn, a clinical report I read in the waiting room with trembling hands. Sophia. Manual strangulation with prolonged positional asphyxia. Time of death, 48 to 72 hours. Perimortem bruising on neck, arms, and thighs, consistent with violent restraint and panic. Thomas. Postmortem dissection with primary cause of death, asphyxia due to laryngeal obstruction, possible inhalation of vomit induced by chloroform. Same time frame, with wool fibers under his fingernails matching the sofa blanket. Your blanket, Carla, but clean of your DNA as if the scene had been staged. No recreational drugs in the system, no obvious sexual abuse in preliminary examination, but minimal traces and ghost. Surgical latex gloves, size 8 male, no fingerprints or transferred DNA. And on both their gums, traces of residual chloroform and ethylene chloride, a cloth soaked in the sweet ether held over children's mouths in the dark, inhaling until the world dissolved into blackness. You're clean, Carla. No stain on your record, not even a parking ticket, Lopez told me at dawn, returning my phone wrapped in a crackling plastic evidence bag, his hand on my shoulder, a compassionate but leaden weight. But don't leave the state. New York needs you as a witness. And pray they don't come back for you. This doesn't end with the bodies. The echoes linger. The following months were a meticulous descent into psychological abyss. A slow and detailed hell that devoured me alive layer by layer, skinning my sanity until only nerves exposed to the wind remained. The press dubbed it the Sleeping Saints of Park Slope in a sensationalist frenzy. Front pages in the New York Post with grainy, pixelated photos of the townhouse cordoned off with yellow tape waving like snakes. Headlines in bold red like arterial blood. Babysitter finds dead dolls in luxury crib, satanic cult or psychopathic father. And speculation on true crime podcasts like Crime Junkie or My Favorite Murder, where whispering voices dissected my story like a corpse on a table, insinuating that I was the black babysitter with a hidden past, or part of an organ trafficking ring in Brooklyn. I, the suspicious babysitter, became a complete outcast. Anonymous threats on Instagram and TikTok, burner accounts with pixelated skull avatars and red eyes. We know what you did to them, you murderous bitch of angels. Your turn is coming with white sheets. Packages with no return address in my rusty mailbox with newspaper clippings of missing children from the 90s. Eyes gouged out with an X-Acto knife and taped to my LinkedIn profile photo with tape stained with fake blood, or worse, real blood. My cat Poe disappeared one night during a torrential storm, thunder rumbling like amplified ticking, leaving only a pool of dark, clotted blood on the linoleum kitchen floor, drops splattered in a radial pattern like a crown of thorns. A killer's stray cat, a warning with claws, or something else, something that had climbed up the vent. and her ghostly meows haunted me in my dreams, a high-pitched wail that merged with the bubbling gurgle of obstructed children's throats, the buzzing of flies in collective wings. I slept with all the lights on, cheap LED bulbs from Amazon that buzzed like flies in agony, casting dancing shadows on the walls that looked like tilted children, pepper spray under my pillow next to a rusty kitchen knife with a splintered wooden handle, and the nightmares were vivid and tactile. Me in the townhouse bedroom, white sheets wrapping around me like living shrouds that contract, milky eyes opening in my own face, small but adult hands, Laura's cold fingers, Martin's splintered nails, squeezing my neck until the ticking of the clock became my final pulse, accelerating to a crescendo of panic before stopping in absolute silence. The investigation rotted like the bodies I had unearthed, a bureaucratic corpse swelling with stagnant reports and evaporated leads. They traced the money through FinCEN, ATM receipts on Wall Street during rush hour, laundered through an anonymous mule in Queens who vanished like smoke, offshore accounts in Panama that bounced to Singapore. The townhouse was raided the next day by a SWAT team with K9 dogs barking frantically at the residual stench. Emptied to its foundations, only dust accumulated in geological layers of neglect, layers of gray ash, tufts of blonde and black hair tangled in the cracks in the floor, like ritual offerings, and a secret drawer in the kitchen under the cracked porcelain sink, with empty but stained frosted glass jars covered with cork stoppers, labeled by hand in shaky calligraphy. Sample 1, Sophia, Eternal Breath, captured 10/10/23, and Sample 2, Thomas, Deep Silence, sealed 10/10/23, residues of epithelial tissue and serous fluid at the bottom, analyzed in the lab as infant lung tissue with signs of asphyxia. Laura and Martin were never found, not a digital trace on the dark web, no fingerprints in the FBI or Interpol database, not a loose thread in the web of false identities. Only echoes, as the doorman had warned, echoes that resonated in anonymous calls to the police station, with recorded laughter and whispers of, "The nanny knows too much," as if they had been ethereal constructs, apparitions, hiring a nanny to unearth their macabre masterpiece, a ritual sacrifice disguised as domestic routine, a canvas of horror painted with children's blood for an invisible audience. Sometimes, in the early hours of perpetual insomnia, in front of the fogged-up window of my apartment, the glass covered with internal frost that draws shapes of small hands, I look at my phone and see spectral notifications flashing on the screen, a DM from a group of nannies inviting me to an urgent job in Park Slope, $500. Children sleeping the sleep of the just. I delete, block, change my SIM card at a midnight deli, but the sweet smell returns with the wind from the East River, permeating my sheets like a shroud woven with threads of formaldehyde, and I hear the irregular ticking of the imaginary clock, the tapping of tiny nails on my kitchen sink, the rustling of dry leaves or blonde pigtails in the hallway of my mind, and I wonder, my heart a knot of eternal suffocating terror, if one day they will knock on my door again at nightfall, smiling with perfect teeth and eyes gray as wells, offering to take care of 2 sleeping children, forever, waiting for me to be the next to join them in their putrid silence. My body dissected on the twin bed, white sheets stained with my own final bile. My name is Emily Harper, and if you had asked me 6 months ago how I would describe my life, I would have said it was an exhausting whirlwind, but full of light. A bright apartment on Manhattan's Upper West Side, overlooking the Hudson River, which glistened like a river of mercury at sunset. A job as a junior editor at Vogue Living, which allowed me to dream of perfect covers while dealing with deadlines that robbed me of sleep. And a husband, David, whose Wall Street smile still made me feel like the college sweethearts we were at Yale. But the real sunshine was Liam, our 3-year-old son, a whirlwind of tousled brown curls, green eyes inherited from me that sparkled with insatiable curiosity, and a bubbly laugh that could dispel the clouds on a rainy day in Central Park. Liam was my anchor, my beloved chaos. Mornings of cereal scattered across the floor like confetti. Afternoons at the park where he ran after pigeons with his arms spread like wings. And nights of bedtime stories where his little head nestled against my chest, his warm breath against my skin, whispering, "Mommy, do dragons sleep?" David and I adored him, but the weight of his energy crushed us. His tantrums were tsunamis, kicks against the walls that left bruises on his chubby little legs, high-pitched cries that pierced our eardrums like jackhammers, demands at 3 a.m. for a stuffed dinosaur that didn't roar enough, or warm milk in a glass with stars. David and I took turns rocking him until dawn in the rocking chair in the living room, our arms numb and our eyes red, while the clock ticked away, the hours like a patient executioner. "We need help, Em," David muttered one night, dark circles like fresh bruises under his eyes as Liam finally surrendered in my lap, sweaty and panting, his little body limp against mine. Not a nanny from Craigslist, something professional, luxury, so we can breathe. That's how we found Elite Caregivers, an elite agency with offices in a gleaming Soho loft where the glass walls reflected your face like a cruel vanity mirror. Their website was an aspirational dream, testimonials in elegant cursive from families of New York high society. Clara transformed our evenings into an oasis of peace. Her touch is magical, almost hypnotic. Photos of nannies in cashmere coats walking through Central Park with children smiling like Renaissance cherubs. Clara Ruiz, 30 years old. Impeccable references from families on the Upper East Side and Tribeca, certificates in child psychology from Columbia, and a master's degree in therapeutic behavior. Profile photo with a serene smile and dark eyes that seemed bottomless wells, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. She's perfect for Liam, I thought, ignoring the slight chill that ran down my neck as I enlarged her image, as if those eyes were not measuring me, but what my home held, the small, vulnerable heartbeat of my son. The interview was virtual, via Zoom on my laptop on the granite island in the kitchen, with Liam scribbling in a notebook beside me. Clara appeared in a bright, minimalist room, the backdrop of leather-bound bookshelves, and a fern plant swaying gently in an invisible breeze, as if breathing. "I adore children, Emily," she said in a soft, modulated voice, like a lullaby woven from fine silk. "The secret is not to fight their fears, but to tame them. I turn them into loyal allies, guardians of their own peace. Liam will be a transformed child." We hired her 3 nights a week, $50 an hour, paid in advance via Venmo. David signed the digital contract with a deep sigh of relief, as if exhaling a year of accumulated fatigue. "This saves us, Em. We'll finally be able to sleep without interruptions." On the first night, Clara arrived punctually at 7 o'clock, the apartment doorbell ringing like a precise pulse in the silence of the hallway. She wore a pearl gray coat that fell like a layer of fog to her ankles and carried a minimalist black leather backpack, unadorned, as if she were carrying secrets instead of diapers. She was taller than the photo suggested, slender as a flexible but resilient reed, with olive skin that seemed to absorb the light from the entryway lamp rather than reflect it, and jet black hair pulled back into a bun so impeccable that not a single strand dared to rebel. Her hands were fine and elegant, her nails short and unpolished, but when she extended one to greet me with a firm handshake, I felt its unnatural coldness, as if it had been immersed in an ice bath for hours, a coldness that seeped through my palm and made the hairs on my forearm stand on end. "Emily, an absolute pleasure, and this is the famous Liam." He, who had been bawling for half an hour over a collapsed block toy, a mess of wood, and tears that had left my nerves raw, fell silent the moment he saw her. It wasn't a cry choking on sobs, but an abrupt and absolute silence, as if someone had flipped a switch in his tiny throat. He hid behind my legs, peeking out only his little head with tousled curls, his big, watery green eyes fixed on her with a mixture of primitive fascination and incipient panic that froze my blood, a reverential fear that did not belong to a 3-year-old facing a stranger. Clara crouched down to his level with feline grace, her tight black dress whispering against the wooden floor, and smiled that serene, magnetic smile, her lips curved in a promise of calm. "Hello, Liam. I'm Clara. We're going to be friends of silence, okay? The kind of silence that keeps beautiful secrets." He didn't respond with words. He just nodded, stiff as a puppet with invisible strings, his chubby little hand clinging to my calf with nails digging into my skin through the fabric of my jeans. That night, there were no tantrums. I heard her sing him a lullaby in Spanish from the half-open door of the bedroom. "Sleep, my child. The stars watch over you with cold, patient eyes." Her voice, a thread of frozen silk tangled in the air, and Liam fell asleep in minutes, his breathing becoming regular like a metronome. When Clara left at 11, hanging up her coat with a fluid movement and disappearing into the elevator like a dissolving shadow, I found David in the kitchen, smiling for the first time in weeks as he made decaf coffee. "It's a miracle, Em. Tomorrow we'll call her for more nights. We'll finally be able to go out without feeling guilty." The first few weeks were a deceptive balm, a mirage of normality that enveloped us like a warm blanket, hiding the cold seeping in at the edges. Clara arrived with surgical precision, always at 7 o'clock sharp, the doorbell announcing her like an inevitable verdict, with her black leather backpack and a craft paper bag filled with organic snacks, unsweetened oatmeal cookies, so he can feel the pure texture, or a new illustrated book for Liam, always on the theme of the wild, bears hibernating in icy caves, wolves howling under full moons, caves where the echo of silence devours sounds. "Today we read about the sleeping winter," she would say in that soft, enveloping voice, and Liam would follow her into the room without protest, a radical change from the previous chaos that had turned us into zombies. I noticed it in the subtle details, cracks in the mirror of perfection. Liam was quiet, not the playful silence of a child exploring the world with endless questions. "Mommy, why is the sky blue?" But a submissive and watchful silence, as if every word were a precious effort he reserved for safe moments, far from her presence. One Saturday afternoon, while Clara was preparing dinner in the kitchen, steamed vegetables, always served cold so he can feel the raw texture like real life, I saw him drawing at the granite island table, his tongue peeking out between his lips in concentration. He was drawing a giant refrigerator, its doors ajar, exhaling white mist like a dragon's breath, and a small child inside, arms outstretched toward the closed door, eyes large and pleading. "It's my drawing for Clara," he said when I asked him, his voice low and almost inaudible, his eyes averted to the floor as if he were afraid to look me directly in the eye. "Why the refrigerator, sweetheart?" He nodded, sucking his thumb hard, leaving a wet trail on his fingertip. "Do you like playing with Clara?" Another pause, and then, "She's a friend of the cold. She teaches me not to be afraid." His smile was tense, a mask that a 3-year-old shouldn't be able to master, lips stretched over small teeth, but eyes that shone with residual panic, like a cornered animal feigning docility. At first, I attributed it to natural adjustment, to the honeymoon of a new routine. David was ecstatic. "It's great, Em. Liam sleeps through the night without interruption. We can go out without that knot in our stomachs." And we did go out. Dinners in Midtown, restaurants with linen tablecloths and candles flickering like conspiratorial eyes, drinks on Chelsea rooftops overlooking the Hudson, which glistened like poison mercury under the moon, conversations flowing without the backdrop of distant crying. But on the nights I stayed home, sleepless from the emotional jet lag of my job, reviewing articles until midnight, emails from invisible bosses, I began to hear them through the thin walls of the apartment. It wasn't shrill crying, not the bubbly laughter of innocent games. They were whispers, a low, rhythmic murmur that seeped like smoke under the door. Clara's voice modulated in hypnotic tones like a therapist in a documentary about cults. "The cold is your friend, Liam. It envelops you, keeps you in its white embrace. If you obey, it won't leave you alone in the void. If you disobey, it stays forever, freezing your heart." Once, I passed by the door to Liam's room, a room painted soft blue with adhesive stars on the ceiling that glowed in the dark like watchful eyes, and I heard her say, with that terrifying calm that I now recognize as the prelude to perversion, "The darkness doesn't bite if you close your eyes and count to 10. It's like a black embrace, soft and eternal. Can you feel how it squeezes you? Don't scream. Don't cry. Silence keeps it still." Liam didn't respond with words. I heard his breathing, rapid and ragged like a rabbit cornered in a trap. A shallow gasp that accelerated into peaks of panic, and subsided only when she intervened with a, "Shh, good boy. The darkness loves you because you're quiet." I thought it was a game, an advanced Montessori method or something out of her Columbia child psychology. But the fear in his eyes when Clara left, not the effusive relief of a liberated child, but a residual tension that tightened his shoulders, as if he expected her imminent return, lurking in the shadows, unsettled me like a thorn stuck in the back of my neck, an itch I couldn't scratch. By the third week, the cracks in the mirage widened like fissures in thin ice, ready to break under the weight of truth. David was in Chicago for an endless cycle of meetings with Asian investors, his presence reduced to static-filled nighttime phone calls and promises of, "I'll be back on Friday, love." Liam had a monumental tantrum at sunset, a cataclysm that left me on the verge of collapse. The stuffed dinosaur didn't roar right, an imaginary defect in the sound mechanism, and he began kicking the kitchen table with his chubby little legs, his high-pitched, piercing cry bouncing off the walls like rubber bullets demanding, Mommy fix it now." Hot tears rolling down his cheeks, red as ripe tomatoes. I knelt down to his level, trying to hug him, but he wriggled like a fish in a net, tiny nails digging into my arms through my cotton blouse. "Liam, please, calm down. Mommy's here." Nothing. The doorbell rang at 7 o'clock sharp, a lifeline in the chaos. Clara entered like a polar breeze, hanging her gray coat with a fluid, precise movement, her dark eyes scanning the scene like a clinical scanner. "Leave it to me, Emily. Go rest. I'll take care of it." I left her, exhausted to the bone, and retired to the master bedroom with a glass of red wine from the bottle David had brought back from Napa, the ruby liquid trembling in the glass as I drank only half of it, the alcohol burning my throat like a reminder of my own fragility. From the hallway, I heard the silence fall like an invisible guillotine, cutting the crying short. No shouts of command, no slaps. Just a soft, rhythmic hush, like the rocking of a rocking chair in an empty house. And then, nothing. An absolute emptiness that made my skin crawl. I came out half an hour later, drawn to the silence like a moth to a flame, and found them in the living room. Liam sitting on the gray leather sofa, motionless as a porcelain statue, staring at the blank wall with glassy, dilated eyes, pupils as large as dark coins. Clara stroked his hair with mechanical, precise movements, not with a mother's tenderness, but as if calibrating a delicate machine, cold fingers sliding through the brown curls in circular patterns, as if tracing invisible runes on his scalp. "Good boy, Liam," she murmured, her voice low and enveloping like honey dripping on snow. "See? Silence is your reward. When you are quiet, the world stands still. When you speak, the cold comes to visit you." He nodded, stiff as a soldier in formation, his chubby little hand clutching the edge of the cushion, knuckles white from the pressure. When he saw me at the door, he smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes, stretched across pale lips, a mask that a 3-year-old shouldn't know how to compose, as if he had rehearsed in front of a mirror in secret. Clara rose with feline grace, smoothing her black dress. "Everything's under control, Emily. Liam learned his lesson today." Lesson. The word stuck in my mind like an icy splinter. a harbinger of the perversion that would unfold. That night, I couldn't sleep. The apartment became a mausoleum of amplified sounds. The monotonous hum of the humidifier in Liam's room, like the purr of a faulty motor. The ticking of the wall clock in the living room, a mechanical heart beating with perverse irregularity, marking not hours, but the rapid heartbeat of my paranoia. I got up at 1 a.m, thirsty and my mouth pasty from the half-finished wine, and walked down the hall in thick socks, the cold wooden floor beneath my feet like hospital tiles at midnight, resonating with a hollow echo that seemed out of place in the apartment. The kitchen door was ajar, just a crack. A sliver of sterile white light seeping like the edge of a knife into the darkness, cutting the hallway in two, light and shadow, life and something worse. I heard a low, rhythmic murmur, like a prayer recited in a dead language, words in Spanish that tangled in the air like smoke. I approached silently, my heart beating like a muffled, frantic drum in my ears, my pulse pounding in my temples until my head ached, and I peered through the crack, my breath held in my chest like a suffocating secret. Clara was standing in front of the open refrigerator, the interior light illuminating her like a relentless interrogation spotlight in an underground cell, bathing her silhouette in a blinding clinical white that erased the shadows from her face, making her look like a wax mannequin animated by a dark pulse. Her impeccable bun had not a hair out of place, the tight black dress outlining her slender figure like a second skin, her pale hands extended like offerings on a pagan altar. In her arms, Liam. She did not rock him with the gentle sway of a lullaby. She did not cradle him against her chest with maternal warmth. She held him upright and rigid, like a sacrificial offering, his little body naked except for a thin white diaper, exposed to the icy air that emanated from the freezer compartment like an Arctic breath, white mist condensing in the air and licking his vulnerable skin. The cold was palpable, even from the doorway. Liam shivered in subtle spasms, his skin bristling with fine, uniform goosebumps, his small lips turning a pale, trembling blue, his cheeks contorted in a grimace of forced tolerance. But he didn't cry. Not a sob. Not a whimper. His eyes, large and green like mine, were fixed on Clara's, mesmerized by a reverential terror that dilated his pupils until they became black wells, silent tears rolling down his cheeks without a sound, freezing into fine crystals on his eyelashes. She moved him closer to the inside of the refrigerator, inch by inch, the beam of white light bathing his pale, contorted little face, illuminating every pore, every bristling hair, as if displaying him on a pedestal of ice. She whispered with terrifying calm, her voice soft as snow falling on a virgin cemetery, words that tangled in the cold air like cobwebs. See, Liam, the cold isn't so bad. It's like when you fall asleep and feel nothing. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't burn like the fire of rage. It's peace, absolute peace. A white blanket that envelops you and shields you from the noises of the world. If you obey Clara, the cold protects you, makes you strong like a bear in its cave. If you disobey, it stays inside you, freezing your heart drop by drop, until you can't even feel it beating. Liam shuddered harder, a muffled sob escaping his throat like a fish gasping for air on ice, his chubby little hand clinging to Clara's neck, not in search of comforting warmth, but in a silent and desperate plea, tiny nails digging into the fabric of her dress, leaving white half-moons on her olive skin. She smiled. That serene, magnetic smile he had seen in the photo, now perverted in its absolute stillness, lips curved in a promise of indulgence that hid the edge of a threat, and brought him an inch closer, the icy air licking her round, exposed belly, causing her skin to contract into fine, painful folds, the blonde hair bristling like the quills of a terrified hedgehog. Feel how it embraces you, Liam, like a winter blanket that won't let go. Isn't it nice? Don't scream, don't cry. Silence is the secret of the cold. If you speak, it gets stronger. It gets into your bones and makes you shiver until you beg for the warmth of obedience. He closed his eyes tightly, tears freezing on his eyelashes like fake diamonds, his breathing becoming shallow and rapid, a ragged gasp that filled the silence of the kitchen like wind in an empty chimney. And then the silence stretched out, broken only by the low, monotonous hum of the refrigerator compressor, a mechanical purr that seemed to laugh at me maliciously, a sound I would now forever associate with the perversion of that scene. I stood frozen in the crack of the door, the forgotten glass of wine in my trembling hand, the ruby liquid spilling drop by drop onto the floor in a pool that spread like diluted blood, my heart a tight fist in my chest, beating hard enough to break my ribs, my breath caught in my throat like a knot of barbed wire. How long did that frozen vigil last? Minutes that stretched into a subjective eternity, an hour compressed in the eye of the storm while Clara held my son like a trophy on the altar of cold, whispering promises of peace that sounded like veiled threats. Her voice, a thread of frozen silk that tangled itself in Liam's soul, weaving a tapestry of obedience forged in terror. Finally, she took him out of the refrigerator's range, closing the door with a soft, definitive click that echoed like a cell bolt, the hum of the compressor fading into a mechanical sigh. She wrapped him in a light cotton blanket, not a thick one to warm him, but a thin one that barely muffled his residual trembling, and sat him on the cold granite countertop, still shaking like a leaf in the wind, his skin pale and marble-like under the fluorescent light. She gave him a sip of tap water, cold as the ice she had just conjured, the liquid dripping down his chin in rivulets that traced furrows in his neck. "Good boy, Liam. Tomorrow we'll play cold again. It'll be our secret, our pact of silence. If you tell Mom, the cold will come to visit you alone without me to guide you." He nodded, exhausted and broken, eyes narrowed in a submission that broke my heart, and she carried him back to bed, turning off the lights one by one with deliberate slowness, leaving the room in absolute darkness that seemed to swallow sound, heat, life itself. I ran to my room in silent panic, locking the door with trembling hands, my body convulsing in shivers that were not from cold, but from a visceral horror that ran up my spine like roots of ice. I curled up in the king-size bed, the Egyptian cotton sheets now a suffocating shroud, the phone in my hand with fingers that wouldn't obey, tempted to call David in Chicago, the elite caregivers agency, to demand explanations, the police to report. What? That my perfect nanny put my son in the open refrigerator to teach him peace. It sounded like the ravings of a paranoid mother, one of those tabloid stories about hysterical parents and saintly nannies. I stayed there in the darkness of my own bedroom, listening to the distant hum of the apartment, the ticking of the clock like a reminder of lost time, until I heard the click of the front door. Clara was leaving, her gray coat enveloping her like a cloak of living shadows, the elevator swallowing her up in its silent descent. Only then did I get up, crawling almost to Liam's room, and check on him in the dim light of the half-open door. He was asleep, but not peacefully. His breathing was shallow and ragged, as if he were saving air for an eternal winter, his skin icy to the touch when I brushed his cheek, cold as the marble of a statue, and he murmured fragmented words in his sleep. Cold. Peace. Don't say. Clara keeps. Fresh tears welled up in my eyes, salty and hot against my skin, and I stood there, watching over him until dawn, the sun filtering through the curtains like an unwanted intruder. The next day, the October sun streamed through the apartment windows, painting the wooden floor with golden spots that seemed like mockery of normality, but the world had changed for me. I had breakfast with Liam in the kitchen, warm oatmeal that he ate in silence, mechanical spoonfuls without the usual mess of spilled milk, his green eyes fixed on the plate as if measuring each bite for fear of making a mistake. "Honey, did you play anything fun with Clara last night?" He nodded, but his smile was that tense mask again, lips stretched over small teeth, eyes averted to the floor. "We played cold. It's good. It makes me strong." His voice was a whisper, as if he feared the walls would hear, and when I tried to hug him, he tensed in my arms, his body stiff as a board, as if the warmth of my skin burned him. "Don't squeeze, Mom." The cold doesn't squeeze. I let him go, my heart sinking like a stone in a well, and took him to the park, pushing the stroller along the sidewalks of Riverside Drive, the crisp autumn air smelling of damp leaves and pretzels from the vendors. Liam played in the sandbox, but without his usual energy. He built meticulous castles, not chaotic towers, and when an older boy took his shovel, he didn't cry or kick. He just stood still, staring at the ground, murmuring, "Silence. Peace." The knot in my stomach tightened, a harbinger of the perversion that would unfold like roots beneath the surface. Clara arrived at 7, as always, the doorbell a verdict that chilled my blood. "Good evening, Emily. Liam is ready for his lesson today." Lesson. The word stuck in my mind like a hypodermic needle injecting slow poison. That night, I pretended to go out. Dinner with a friend from the magazine. But I stayed in the hallway of the building, hidden in the shadows of the service elevator, my heart beating a panicked rhythm that echoed in my ears like a war drum. I waited 10 minutes, 20, until the apartment sank into its sinister routine. I returned with the duplicate key, entering silently like a thief in my own home, and positioned myself in the hallway, the kitchen door ajar again, the white glow filtering through like a beacon in the fog. This time, it was the bathroom. Lights off. The hallway closet door closing with a click that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I heard Clara's voice, low and enveloping. "Darkness is your most loyal friend, Liam. There are no monsters if you don't see them, if you close your eyes and count to 10 in silence. It's like a black embrace, soft and eternal, squeezing your chest until your heart beats slowly, very slowly. Can you feel how it envelops you? Don't scream. Don't cry. Silence keeps it still, makes it your guardian. If you speak, if you make a noise, the darkness grows, filling with sounds that only you can hear, whispers of things that come to find you." A muffled sob from Liam, small and broken, like a wounded animal in a trap, and then the click of the switch, light. They came out of the closet, Liam pale as a ghost, cheeks wet with silent tears, clinging to Clara's leg with trembling hands. "Good boy. Tomorrow, absolute silence. That will be our pact." The perversion was revealed in successive layers, like peeling a rotten onion layer by layer, each more fetid and corrosive than the last, revealing the black putrid core. One night in the 4th week, David back from Chicago, we pretended to have a romantic dinner at the Italian restaurant on the corner. Pasta with pesto and Chianti wine that tasted like ripe berries, but we returned early, climbing the service staircase so as not to alert Clara. The apartment was in darkness, only the dim light from the living room filtering under the door of Liam's room. We approached silently, David frowning, my stomach churning like a stormy sea. We peered through the crack. Clara was on the balcony, ours overlooking a ventilation shaft as deep and black as an urban abyss, the October wind whipping the curtains like mourning veils. She was holding him over the low wrought iron railing, his little legs dangling in the void, the cold air from the shaft licking his cotton pajamas. "The void doesn't fall if you don't call it, Liam. It's like the cold, but down below. If you obey, it stays still, a friend that doesn't touch you. If you scream, if you kick, it pushes you with invisible fingers, takes you to nothingness where there is no mommy or daddy." Liam froze in her arms, eyes tightly closed, tears rolling silently down his cheeks, body stiff as a surfboard on a petrifying wave. He didn't scream. He didn't move. He just trembled, a tiny tremor that Clara calmed with a whisper. "Good. The void loves you because you're quiet. Our secret, forever." David squeezed my hand until it hurt, his face as white as a ghost sheet. "Jesus, Em, what the hell is this?" The confrontation came like an inevitable avalanche. The next day, with David home for a day off, We waited for her in the living room. Cold coffee on the table, the air thick with tension like before a storm. Clara came in at 7, gray coat hanging, smile serene as always. "Good evening. Is Liam ready?" David stood up, his voice hoarse with contained anger. "No, Clara. You sit down, let's talk." We took her to the kitchen, Liam in his playpen in the living room, playing with blocks in obsessive silence. "We've seen what you do," I said, my voice trembling but firm, replaying the audio secretly recorded the night before. The whisper of the cold, the embrace of darkness. Clara didn't pale, didn't deny it. She sat gracefully, crossing her legs, dark eyes fixed on mine like wells that sucked me in. "It's my method, Emily. Controlled terror, gradual exposure, and aversive conditioning. It's not sadism, it's science. Cold to tame rage, darkness for uncontrolled curiosity. Silence for rebellion, emptiness for defiance. I condition him to obey for instinctive survival, not for feigned love. It hurts a little at first, but then peace. Absolute peace. His previous parents asked for it. They wanted a perfect child, not a savage. Don't you see? Liam doesn't cry anymore. He's docile, attentive, an angel. My gift to you." David exploded, his voice like thunder. "He's a child, not an experiment. You're terrorizing him." Clara smiled, that wicked smile in her stillness, eyes shining with a clinical dark pride. "Fear is the best teacher, David. Without it, children are chaos. With it, they are perfect. Liam adores me now, secretly. He fears what would come without me. The cold alone, the darkness without guidance." We called the police that same night. Officers in the apartment with notebooks and crackling radios. But Clara was gone before they arrived, backpack in hand, disappearing into the elevator with one last look. The terror stays with him, Emily. It's part of his peace now. The agency defended her. Unconventional method, but legal, impeccable references. The police. No bruises, no crime, just alternative parenting. Liam changed forever. Now he's quiet, submissive, looking at me with eyes that measure my movements as if I were the threat. He fears the cold. He cries when he opens the refrigerator, the dark. He sleeps with all the lights on, the silence. He speaks in whispers, as if the void were stalking him. And at night, I hear whispers in his room. "Clara is coming soon. Obey, or the cold will find you." She left us a perverse gift, a perfect child, forged in terror. And I, the mother who allowed it for a moment's respite, live with the eternal whisper of the cold in my own soul, waiting for her return. My name is Rebecca Ellis, and if you had met me 8 months ago, you would have seen me as the near-perfect embodiment of New York motherhood. 34 years old, freelance editor of children's books for a boutique press in the West Village, with a cozy apartment in Chelsea that smelled of vanilla from diptyque candles, lit on light wood shelves, and the oatmeal raisin cookies I baked on Sunday mornings, while the sun filtered through white linen curtains like a veil of translucent innocence, staining the parquet floor with golden spots that looked like caresses from the sky. My husband, Alex, was the unwavering pillar of our daily life, an architect at a midtown firm with eternal views of the Empire State Building towering like an accusing finger on the skyline, with that disarming, crooked smile that still made me blush after 7 years of marriage, blue eyes that crinkled at the corners when he laughed at our shared anecdotes from Yale, stolen study nights in the library, stolen kisses in the rain on the quad, and strong, calloused hands that built models of impossible buildings on the dining room table, always with Emma climbing onto his lap to help with foam blocks, her chubby little fingers interfering with the perfect lines, while he feigned exasperation with a knowing wink. But the real sun, the axis around which our fragile and precious world revolved, was Emma, our 3-year-old daughter, a whirlwind of messy blonde curls that danced like rebellious rays of sunshine when she ran through the room, brown eyes like mine that sparkled with insatiable curiosity. and a bubbly laugh that was like wind chimes in a summer breeze, contagious and pure, capable of dispelling the clouds on a gray day in Washington Square Park with a simple, "Look, Mommy, the bird is my friend." Emma was my everything, my anchor in the sea of deadlines and meetings, mornings in the park where she chased pigeons with her arms outstretched like clumsy angel wings, shouting, "Fly with me, Mom, fly high like in the stories." Afternoons of naps curled up on the gray velvet sofa I inherited from my mother, her warm, heavy head nestled on my chest, her sweet, milky breath against my skin exposed under my unbuttoned blouse, whispering babbling dreams about princesses who built castles of clouds and cotton candy, her chubby little hand resting on my belly, as if still searching for the beat of a shared heart. Alex and I adored her with an animalistic, all-consuming ferocity that left us exhausted at the end of the day, stolen kisses on her sleeping crown, shared sighs in the kitchen at midnight while she kicked her feet in her crib. But her energy was a capricious and unpredictable hurricane, sudden volcanic tantrums over shoes that didn't sing enough when stepping on the parquet floor, hysterical and piercing cries like nails on a chalkboard over a stuffed animal forgotten at daycare that cried alone in the cold darkness, endless and suffocating nights when we rocked her in the rocking chair in the living room until dawn, arms numb and throbbing, eyes red like smoldering embers, while she kicked her chubby little legs demanding, "More stories, Mom. More stories now, or the dragon will come and eat my heart." Her little face, red and contorted in a rictus of childish fury that tore my soul in two, leaving a void that only her subsequent embrace could fill. Alex and I took turns in that exhausting circular dance, a waltz of fatigue that left our nerves raw. But the weight crushed us like an invisible and growing slab, robbing us of our nights of intimacy in the double bed, where we used to entangle ourselves in rumpled sheets with hot whispers and stifled laughter, now reduced to exhausted "better tomorrow" before falling into a dreamless sleep. "We need help, Bex," he murmured, one sticky, rainy Friday night, the water pounding on the windows like insistent fingers, with deep purple circles like fresh bruises under his blue eyes that now looked like cloudy lakes, as Emma finally surrendered in my lap after an hour of incessant, desperate crying over a wrong left sock that didn't hug her foot like the right one, her limp, sweaty little body against mine, her ragged breathing calming into soft, broken gasps that broke my heart. Not a nanny from around the corner or Craigslist, with faded tattoos and dubious stories that smell of cigarette smoke. Something sweet, reliable from a premium app, so we can breathe a little, go out to dinner without the perpetual knot in our stomachs, be ourselves again. I nodded, exhausted to the bone, my hair stuck to my forehead from the sweat of the endless battle, tears of frustration drying on my cheeks like salt on an open wound. And the next day, while Emma napped in her crib with white curved bars like a fine porcelain cage, I downloaded Nanny Match, an exclusive platform for premium caregivers with FBI background checks, algorithm-verified reviews, and video testimonials from beaming mothers who swore by their domestic angels. I swiped through profiles like a perverse Tinder for the maternal soul. Single mothers with boundless energy and commercial smiles, NYU students with bright eyes, and backpacks full of educational toys, until I came across Sarah Klein, 28 years old, originally from a sleepy, forgotten town in Connecticut called Ridgefield, with a profile photo showing her sitting on a park bench under a gnarled 100-year-old oak tree, smiling shyly at the camera with large, watery blue eyes that looked like pools of deep, stagnant water, reflecting not light but a subtle emptiness, short, wavy brown hair framing a sweet, almost fragile face, like an antique porcelain doll about to crack under the pressure of a touch too firm. Her reviews were miniature poetry, written in elegant cursive, Sarah is a shy angel who makes my 2-year-old daughter feel safe in the chaos of the city, as if the world were a gentle fairy tale. Sweet as an apple pie baked in a wood-fired oven, she transforms tantrums into shared laughter that lasts. She came into our lives like a gentle autumn breeze, and now we can't imagine afternoons without her calming presence, like a well-kept secret. I interviewed her that same afternoon via video call on my laptop on the granite island in the kitchen, Emma scribbling in a notebook beside me with thick crayons that stained the polished surface like innocent blood. Sarah appeared in a bright, minimalist room, against a backdrop of low shelves lined with children's books bound in soft, colorful fabric, and a fern plant swaying in an invisible, constant breeze, as if breathing with a life of its own, its green leaves whispering against the silence of the screen. "Hi, I'm Sarah," she said in a soft voice, stuttering a little at first, her hands clasped in her lap as if apologizing for invading the digital space, a slight blush coloring her pale cheeks. "I adore children. They're like pure, malleable sponges, absorbing everything you give them with an open heart and no filters, molding themselves to your touch like fresh clay." Her shyness was charming, a veil of vulnerability that made Emma, restless in my lap, reach out with her red crayon as an offering. "I'm drawing for you, Sarah." Sarah took it on the screen, blue eyes shining with an inner light that seemed like hunger disguised as tenderness. "It's beautiful, Emma. Like you, a drawing that tells a secret." We hired her for 2 afternoons and 1 evening a week, $40 an hour, paid weekly in cash to keep it personal. Alex signed the digital agreement with a kiss on my cheek, his warm, dry lips against my skin chilled by the apartment's air conditioning, a touch that made me close my eyes for a second, remembering times when kisses were a prelude to something more intimate. "She's perfect, Bex. Look how Emma looks at her, like a secret friend, a mirror to watch herself play." The first few weeks were a deceptive and seductive idyll, a respite that brought back the pink to our cheeks and the playful sparkle to our eyes, a balm that smeared the cracks of our exhaustion with sweet, sticky honey, hiding the poison seeping around the edges. Sarah arrived with Swiss watch punctuality, always at 4 in the afternoon for sunny afternoons and 7 for twilight evenings, the apartment doorbell ringing like a reliable and seductive pulse in the silence of the building's hallway, bringing with her a reusable organic cotton tote bag dyed pastel blue, filled with meticulously planned surprises wrapped in layers of tenderness. Homemade oatmeal cookies with juicy raisins, so they feel the warm sun in their mouths, like a summer hug that melts slowly. Picture books with ethereal and detailed illustrations of flowers that whisper secrets to the wind when no one is listening, secrets that only children understand, and a soft white plush rabbit with black button eyes that Emma immediately named Whisper, cradling it against her chubby chest like a talisman against loneliness, her chubby little hands digging her fingers into its fur as if seeking warmth in its softness. She was shy, yes, with a shyness that bordered on fragility and absolute vulnerability. She blushed like a schoolgirl from the 1950s when Alex thanked her for saving our sanity with your magic, and she looked down at the polished parquet floor when I asked her about her family with casual curiosity. My parents, they're quiet, in Ridgefield. Not much to tell, just a small town, you know, with old wooden houses that creak like bones, and 100-year-old trees that seem like silent guardians of buried secrets. But with Emma, she was a domestic goddess, a weaver of dreams and whispers, a presence that turned chaos into calm with a touch that seemed innocent, but now, in retrospect, feels like a silk thread tangled in the soul. The tantrums, those emotional tsunamis that left us shipwrecked in a sea of tears and exhaustion, evaporated like fog in the sun at her arrival, when Emma began stomping on the wooden floor with her patent leather shoes, a sharp, piercing cry that bounced off the walls like rubber bullets in a padded room, demanding, "Stuffed animal now, Sarah, or the dragon will eat me." Sarah would crouch down to her level with an almost ethereal feline grace, her oversized gray sweater falling like a soft mist around her slender shoulders, her voice soft as fine rain on an old slate roof. "Shh, Emma," whispered the bunny, says that stuffed animals always come back if we call them with love and patience, like a secret between friends that no one else can hear. And it worked, like black magic disguised as a fairy godmother, Emma calming down in seconds, her red face relaxing into a trembling smile, curling up in Sarah's lap with a deep, shaky sigh, laughing with that bubbly, pure laugh that made me feel like the world was, after all, a kind and redeemable place, her chubby little hands clinging to Sarah's sweater like a lifeline in a sea of apparent calm, fingers sinking into the gray wool as if seeking anchorage in its feigned warmth. One afternoon in the second week, I saw them from the kitchen window, the steam from the stainless steel teapot rising in white spirals like playful ghosts as I prepared mint tea to calm my frayed nerves. Sarah and Emma on the living room floor, on the Persian rug I inherited from my grandmother, with its intricate patterns like labyrinths of red and blue threads, building a castle out of smooth, polished wooden blocks with crooked towers, and an imaginary moat filled with sleeping dragons whispering dreams. Sarah imitated the voice of a princess with an exaggerated, playful accent, a shy, broken falsetto that made Emma double over with laughter, her blonde curls flying like crazy rays of sunshine, the sound of her laughter bouncing off the walls like echoes of pure joy. "You're funny, Sarah. Do it again. Do the stumbling princess," my daughter squealed, and Sarah blushed to her ears, a pink flush rising up her pale neck like a tide of embarrassment. But she smiled, a genuine radiant smile that lit up her fragile face like a lonely lantern in the fog of an autumn night, blue eyes sparkling with a deep, contained joy, as if the pleasure of others' laughter filled her with a subtle hunger. "You make me funny, Emma. You're my magic mirror, reflecting the best of me, what I didn't know I had." The phrase made me pause, the teapot trembling in my hand until the water splashed onto the granite countertop in hot drops that burned my skin, a slight chill running down the back of my neck like a cold, invisible finger tracing the line of my spine, down to the base where it meets my hip. Mirror. An innocent word, a child's game, but at that moment, with the setting sun staining the room a bloody fiery turgid, viscous orange that spilled across the floor like diluted blood, it sounded like a dark omen, an echo of twisted fairy tales where mirrors do not reflect the truth, but devour it, absorbing the reflection until the original fades away, a void in the shape of a woman. But the cracks appeared subtle and treacherous, like fine, sticky cobwebs weaving themselves into the corners of a window fogged by the warm breath of the night, invisible until the light of dawn reveals them with relentless cruelty. At first, I attributed it to the mimetic charm of childhood, to that voracious sponge that absorbs everything it touches without discrimination, molding itself to the shape of the world with blind innocence. Emma began to adopt little gestures from Sarah, innocent at first, almost adorable in their clumsy imitation, the way she bit her lower lip when she was concentrating on a wooden puzzle, a subtle, nervous tic that Sarah had, an unconscious habit I had never noticed until I saw it reflected in my daughter, repeating it as she put the pieces together with her chubby, clumsy fingers, her brown eyes fixed on the puzzle with that shy, evasive intensity, as if she were afraid of making a mistake and being punished by the invisible gaze of a silent, eternal judge. "Look, Mom, like Sarah does when she thinks in secret," she said one sunny Saturday morning, biting her lip until a trickle of pink blood appeared in the soft corner, shining in the kitchen light like a forbidden jewel, and I laughed, wiping it away with my thumb moistened with maternal saliva, the metallic, salty taste clinging to my skin like a kiss of involuntary betrayal. "You're a copycat monkey, Em. You copy everything good about your friend, like a game of shadows." But then came the phrases, not the capricious and imperious babbling of a 3-year-old, but precise and chilling echoes that came out of her little mouth, as if someone else were whispering them from her throat. Emma, who had previously demanded, "Juice now, Mom, now or I'll cry," in a high-pitched, demanding voice that bounced off the walls like an echo of childish rage, began to say, "Please, the juice, if it's not too much trouble," with Sarah's exact intonation, that stuttering, humble pause before trouble, as if asking permission to exist in the space she occupied, a shy, submissive whisper coming from her small throat like a secret stolen from someone else's diary. Wrapped in layers of unnecessary apology, Alex noticed it during dinner on a rainy Wednesday, the water tapping on the windows like insistent fingers as he carved roast chicken on the polished oak table, steam rising in ghostly spirals under the dim light of the crystal chandelier that tinkled in the wind. "Hey, Bex, did you teach Emma that? She sounds like a Victorian tea lady, all if it's no trouble," in that soft little voice. I laughed, but the sound came out forced and metallic, a hollow echo resonating in my chest like a broken bell in an abandoned tower. "It's Sarah, love. She's so sweet and shy, she sticks to you like honey to your fingers, as if Emma wants to be her playful shadow." He nodded, serving Emma a juicy piece of chicken with an indulgent smile, but I saw the slight furrow in his brow. A fleeting flash of unease that we shared silently across the table, like an electric secret that neither of us wanted to name for fear of making it real. The tension then grew like a suffocating, voracious vine in the darkness of a damp, forgotten basement, subtle but relentless in its advance, its thin, sticky tendrils wrapping around my throat on nights of growing insomnia, when the apartment became a labyrinth of elongated shadows, whispering doubts and omens in the corners, the October wind howling outside like a chorus of lost souls. One night in the third week, Alex and I went out to a concert at Lincoln Center, violins weeping box-haunting obsessive melodies into the air thick with expensive perfume and nervous sweat, sparkling wine bubbling in cut-glass goblets like bubbles from a fragile, fleeting dream. But we returned early, the A subway rattling under the city like a ghost train in abandoned, damp tunnels, the car smelling of sticky rain, and the static electricity of the storm brewing on the horizon, distant thunder rumbling like divine warnings. The apartment was enveloped in an oppressive and watchful silence when we entered with the key trembling in my hand, a silence that was not the peaceful silence of a sleeping and contented home, but the heavy and expectant silence of a tomb freshly sealed with fresh earth, the air thick and heavy with the subtle scent of chamomile tea that Sarah always made for Emma before bed, a ritual that now seemed to me like poison disguised as a sedative. Sarah was in the kitchen, washing dishes with meticulous repetitive movements like an obsessive ritual, the water running in a thin, steady stream that splashed the white porcelain like silent, restrained tears, her slim, ethereal figure silhouetted against the window overlooking the building's ventilation shaft, shadows of power lines dancing across her pale face like dark pulsing veins beneath her skin. Emma slept in her crib with white curved bars, the baby monitor lit up on the coffee table in the living room with a ghostly flickering green glow, her breathing regular but shallow like a faulty metronome on the screen, a sound that now made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. "Everything's fine," Sarah said, drying her hands on a flowered dishcloth with faded daisies, smiling that shy, evasive smile that I now saw as a mask cracked from within, lips curved in a promise of innocence that hid sharp teeth. Emma fell asleep counting stars on the adhesive ceiling, the ones that glow in the dark like little eyes. She's so receptive, like a sponge that absorbs everything. Her voice had a new undertone, a subtle echo of something that wasn't pure shyness, but a growing possession, a veiled hunger that seeped into the syllables like ink in clear water. And when she left in the elevator, her pearl gray coat enveloping her like a layer of living, sticky fog, I stared at the locked door, my heart beating an erratic, uneven rhythm that echoed in my ears like a distant warning drum. a pulse that was not mine, but that of something lurking in the shadows. The next day, the October sun streamed through the apartment's tall, arched windows, painting the oak parquet floor with elongated golden patches that looked like ghostly fingers reaching out from the dark corners of the room. But the world had begun to tilt for me at a subtle and disconcerting angle, a slight, persistent dizziness that I attributed to the overly strong, black coffee I drank from a thermos to ward off fragmented sleep. I had breakfast with Emma at the polished granite kitchen island, warm oatmeal with slices of ripe banana that she ate with obsessive and meticulous silence, small, precise spoonfuls without the usual mess of milk spilled on the white linen tablecloth, her brown eyes fixed on the porcelain plate, as if measuring each bite for fear of making a mistake, of spilling a drop that would invoke an invisible and silent judgment from the shadows of the room. "Honey, did you play something fun with Sarah last night? Block castles or crazy-colored drawings?" She nodded slowly, but her smile was that tense, unnatural mask again, lips stretched over small, pearly teeth in a curve that didn't reach her eyes averted to the terracotta tile floor, as if the linoleum held buried secrets, whispers of voices only she could hear. "We played mirror, Mom. Sarah says I'm her magic mirror, the best she's ever had. I copy everything she does, and she copies what I do, until we're the same." Her voice was an almost inaudible whisper, a silk thread breaking in the air, as if she feared that the walls, or something beating inside them, would hear and judge with cold fingers. And when I tried to hug her, pulling her into my lap with arms that trembled slightly, her body tensed in my arms like a stiff wooden board, as if my warmth burned her from within, my touch a profane intrusion into her sacred space. "Don't squeeze so hard, Mom. Sarah says soft hugs are better, like a secret whispered in your ear, not a shout." I let go immediately, my heart sinking like a heavy stone into a bottomless, echoless well, a coldness creeping up my spine like roots of frozen, thorny ivy, branching out into my limbs until my fingers went numb, and I took her to the park, pushing the stroller along the cobblestone sidewalks of Chelsea with mechanical steps, the crisp autumn air smelling of damp, rotting leaves mixed with the cloying sweetness of hot pretzels from street vendors. Emma played in the sandbox with grainy, cold sand, but without her usual energy, that explosion of laughter and sand flying in crazy arcs. She built meticulous, symmetrical castles, perfect towers with precise moats, and when an older boy took a red plastic shovel from her with a "It's mine now, shorty," she didn't cry or kick like the Emma of before, that little wild animal who scratched and screamed for justice. She just stood still, motionless like a statue of salt, staring at the ground with glassy, dilated eyes, murmuring to herself in a low, repetitive tone, "Silence. Copy. Mirror. Don't say anything, Emma, or the mirror will break and see you." A mantra that came out of her small mouth like a spell learned by heart in the shadows, a spell that froze the blood in my veins until the world turned gray at the edges. Sarah arrived at 4 in the afternoon, the doorbell ringing like an inexorable metallic verdict in the silence of the apartment. Carrying her pastel blue reusable cloth bag with a new book about magic mirrors that reflect dreams and hidden secrets, her shy smile curving lips that I now saw as soft traps. "Hello, Rebecca. Is Emma ready for our mirror session? Today we're practicing deep reflections." Session. The word stuck in my mind like a fine, rusty needle in soft flesh, injecting a slow, burning poison that spread through my veins in branches of cold fire, a harbinger of the perversion that would unfold like roots in damp earth. That afternoon, I pretended to work at my mahogany desk in the corner of the room, my laptop screen open to a manuscript of fairy tales that now read like sinister and twisted prophecies. Girls lost in forests of mirrors that do not reflect, but devour the soul of the beholder. But I slipped out into the hallway with my heart beating a rhythm of growing panic that echoed in my ears like a tribal war drum in a dense, suffocating jungle, hidden behind the half-open door of the nursery. The stale air of the hallway permeated with dried lavender and something else, a metallic sweetness like fresh ink and nervous sweat. I heard Sarah's voice in the nursery, soft but insistent, a black silk thread tangled in the heavy air. "Now, Emma, repeat after me, note for note. Hello, I'm Rebecca, and today I edited a beautiful book about princesses who get lost in mazes of broken mirrors." Emma's voice, a tiny, precise echo coming from her throat like a trained parrot in the shadows, a babble that was no longer hers. "Hello, I'm Rebecca, and today I edited a beautiful book about princesses who get lost in labyrinths of broken mirrors." A long pause, and Sarah correcting with that perverse and enveloping sweetness, her voice modulated in hypnotic tones that stuck in the brain like hooks. Slower, my mirror, with that pause on beautiful, as if it were a secret that only you keep deep in your chest. Feel how the word sticks to your tongue, how it becomes part of you. Good, perfect. Now the laughter. Ha ha ha. Soft, not loud like thunder that awakens dragons, but like a breeze that brushes the skin in the darkness. Ha ha ha. Let it come out of your throat like a stolen whisper. Emma repeated it, her laughter a distorted and chilling mirror coming out of her small throat like an echo drowned in a deep bottomless well. An imitation so exact and cruel that it froze the blood in my veins until I felt the cold spread to my limbs. My fingers numb against the wood of the door, I stood frozen in the hallway, the world tilting in a nauseating and persistent vertigo, my heart a tight throbbing fist in my chest that beat hard enough to break fragile ribs, my breath caught in my throat like a twisted, rusty, barbed wire knot, cutting with every tentative inhalation. What was that, my God? Not veiled threats with knives in the dark, not sadistic blows that left purple marks on my daughter's porcelain skin. An imitation, a parasitic and voracious absorption, a rehearsal where my daughter was the living, breathing stage, the canvas on which Sarah practiced for, what? An identity theft that began in a child's mind, a subtle replacement that would erase my essence from Emma's memory like a ghost eraser on a fresh, damp canvas. I went out that night, running to a bar on the corner of 8th Avenue with the sticky rain lashing my face like someone else's tears, vodka tonic burning like corrosive acid in my parched throat, hot, salty tears mixing with the alcohol on the sticky, stained bar, the bartender, a burly guy with faded tattoos of anchors and roses on his forearms, looking at me with tired but kind eyes, a worry line on his forehead. "Everything okay, ma'am? Looks like your world just fell apart." I shook my head, unable to speak, the lump in my throat a noose that tightened with every attempt at speech, the vodka rising in retches that I swallowed hard, the bitter taste clinging to my palate like a kiss of deep, unintentional betrayal. I returned at midnight, the apartment shrouded in a funeral-like oppressive silence that seemed to have weight, a blanket that settled on my shoulders like lead, Emma asleep in her crib with Whisper curled up against her chubby chest, the white stuffed animal now stained with dried tears and little fingerprints on its fur like a miniature shroud woven with threads of lost innocence. Sarah was already gone, her scent, dried lavender and something metallic, like fresh ink mixed with the nervous sweat of a confession, lingering in the air like a sticky ghost clinging to the curtains and sheets, a perfume I now associated with nausea. I collapsed onto the gray velvet sofa, laptop on my trembling lap, and checked the security cameras we had installed in the nursery the week before, a Nest set with HD audio and infrared night vision. Just in case, I had told Alex with a forced smile, but in my mind, it was a shield against the invisible, a mechanical eye that didn't blink or judge, only recorded the raw truth. Hours of footage unfolded before me like a reel of black and white psychological horror film. the glow of the screen illuminating my pale face in the darkness of the room. Sarah spending time with Emma, but not in innocent games of stacked blocks or stories whispered in character voices, rehearsing. Look, Emma, this is how mommy walks when she's happy. Short, light steps, hips slightly to the left when she turns toward the kitchen. A quick fleeting smile that fades into her eyes, as if hiding a sweet secret. You do it, step by step, feel how your body moves like mine. Emma, wobbling on her chubby, clumsy little legs, imitating the walk with chilling, mechanical precision, laughing at first with that bubble of pure, contagious sound, then with a growing tension in her small, round shoulders, as if the weight of imitation were crushing her from within, her laughter turning into a muffled echo that resonated in the room like disguised crying. Now sign it, my mirror. REBECCA, a soft and elegant curve at the end of the final R, like a bow closing around the name, a kiss on the paper. Sign this paper, as if it were an important contract, one that can never be broken, that binds destiny. Emma scribbled with a thick, blunt crayon, her tongue peeking out between her concentrated pink lips, leaving irregular grooves that Sarah corrected with a gentle finger. More curved, Emma, like mom's hug when she puts you to sleep. Perfect. Tomorrow. The voice for Dad at dinner. I missed you so much today, Alex. Come closer and tell me about your buildings that touch the sky. Say the words. Feel them come out of your throat like a sweet, warm secret, like the ones Mom whispers in bed. My voice, my walk, my signature scribbled on weekly grocery checks, my intimate words for Alex, phrases whispered in the darkness of our master bedroom, post-coital and hoarse. I missed you so much. Come closer. With hot breath against his neck, now coming out of my daughter's mouth like a desecrated and distorted echo, a theft from the bedroom that froze the blood in my veins until I felt the cold spread to my extremities, numb fingers against the laptop keyboard. The horror seeped in then, slow and corrosive, like poison injected into a main vein and branching out, spreading through my body in waves of visceral nausea and growing paranoia, a cold fire burning from within with no visible flame, leaving only ashes of doubt and a void that expanded like a crack in the ice. It was not obvious physical harm. There were no bruises hidden under soft cotton pajamas with star prints, no muffled screams in the night that would wake the neighbors upstairs with their heavy footsteps, but a slow and meticulous usurpation of intimacy, a perversion of the maternal essence where Sarah used Emma as a living, breathing rehearsal, a distorted and malleable mirror to absorb my being drop by drop, my soft gl laughter in conversations with Alex, my swaying hips as I cooked in the kitchen, my hoarse whispers in the double bed, erasing me from my daughter's mind like a ghost eraser on a fresh, damp canvas, replacing me in her small, vulnerable world like clay, molded by expert cold hands that knew every curve, every secret. That night, I curled up in bed with Alex after he returned from Boston, his warm, familiar body pressed against mine in the darkness of the rumpled sheets. But sleep was a black, swirling abyss of vivid tactile nightmares. Emma, with my face superimposed on Sarah's in a grotesque montage, laughing with my voice gluggluggle, but with her watery blue eyes, signing shopping checks with my elegant curve on the R, while I faded into the background of the frame, a blurry, ethereal ghost in my own life, whispering, "I love you, Sarah, Mommy," in an eternal obsessive loop that echoed in my skull like a cursed, repetitive mantra. The sound of her voice, my voice, her voice, our voice, digging into my brain like nails on an endless chalkboard. At dawn, with the sun filtering through the linen curtains like an unwanted and accusing intruder, I secretly installed more cameras, an army of mechanical eyes blinking red in the corners. One in the living room, hidden in the bookshelf behind the Gruffalo, another in the bathroom behind the lavender-scented liquid soap dispenser, a third in the kitchen pointing at the table where Emma ate her cereal, the red eye blinking like a mechanical demon that didn't blink or judge, only recorded the raw, merciless truth. "You're being paranoid, Bex," Alex said that morning over breakfast, kissing my forehead with lips dry from black, bitter coffee, his warm breath against my cold, goosebumped skin, a touch that now felt like an intrusion into my own intimacy. "Sarah is a shy, sweet love. Look how Emma adores her. How she calms down with her like some kind of good black magic. She's just what we needed, a breather in the chaos of our lives." I nodded, forcing a smile that felt like a mask of melted wax about to slip off. But the knot in my stomach was a noose that tightened with every tick Emma repeated, the bite on her now bloody lip during breakfast, leaving a pink trickle that she licked with her tongue peeking out. Every phrase that came out of her small mouth with Sarah's evasive and submissive intonation. "If it's not too much trouble, Mom, juice with ice." As if my daughter no longer asked with the imperious joy of before, but begged permission to drink, to exist in my presence. The perversion escalated in the following weeks, perverse in its calculated and obsessive subtlety, a psychological horror that seeped like toxic, sticky smoke into the lungs of our family, burning from within with no visible flame or escape, leaving only ashes of doubt, paranoia, and a void that expanded like a crack in the ice of a frozen lake. One night in the 5th week, spying from the hallway closet with the door ajar a finger, the stale, rancid air smelling of moldy mothballs and my own cold, acidic sweat, my heart beating a rhythm of growing panic that echoed in my ears like a tribal war drum in a dense, suffocating jungle, the vertigo making the world tilt in waves. I heard Sarah in the master bedroom, the room Alex and I shared with its crumpled Egyptian cotton sheets and the lingering scent of our morning sex. Emma in her arms like a limp, malleable rag doll, the light from the glass bedside table casting long, grotesque shadows on the white walls, like accusing fingers stretching from the ceiling. Now, the secret of Mom and Dad's night, Emma. When they lie down in this big bed, Mom whispers, "I missed you so much today, Alex. Come closer and feel my skin against yours, like at Yale in the rain." Say the words. Feel them come out of your throat like a sweet, warm secret, like Mom's breath in the dark. Emma obeying in a hypnotic babble, her tiny voice imitating my postcoital hoarse whispers, the ones Alex and I shared in the darkness of our master bedroom, with the heavy air of desire and sweat, intimate and private words that now came out of my daughter's mouth like a desecrated and distorted echo, a theft from the bedroom that froze the blood in my veins until I felt the cold spread to my limbs. My fingers numb against the splintered wood of the closet door. Sarah laughed then, a shy and broken gel, but tinged with something darker, a veiled and possessive triumph. Good. My perfect and living mirror. Tomorrow, when Daddy kisses you on the top of your head before bed, you kiss him back like that, but in your mind repeat those words. Feel how they stick to your tongue like warm honey. Soon, you'll say it out loud, and he won't notice the difference. He'll take you in his arms as if you were me, his little Rebecca. I'll be Rebecca for you, for him, for when Mom goes on a trip or disappears into a broken mirror. Emma nodded her heavy head, her brown eyes shining with a childish and profound confusion that tore my soul to bloody shreds, clinging to whisper with little hands that trembled like leaves in the wind. The white stuffed animal now stained with dried tears and little fingerprints on its fur, like a miniature shroud woven with threads of lost and corrupted innocence. I, from the confining and suffocating closet, bit my fist until warm blood dripped down my wrist, the pain a cruel anchor against the vertigo that made me stagger, bile rising up my esophagus like a river of corrosive and bitter acid. The horror was a slow and meticulous usurpation of the most sacred intimacy, a perversion of the maternal and conjugal essence, where Sarah used Emma as a living, breathing rehearsal, a distorted and malleable mirror to absorb my being. My soft girl laughter in whispered conversations with Alex about future projects, my swaying hips as I cooked intimate dinners in the kitchen under the dim light, my hoarse, hot whispers in the marital bed with my breath ragged against her neck, erasing me from my daughter's mind like a ghost eraser on a fresh, damp canvas, replacing me in her small, vulnerable world like clay molded by expert, cold hands that knew every secret curve, every private whisper. That night, I curled up on the gray velvet sofa in the living room until the gray dawn, the baby monitor projecting Emma's sleeping face in ghostly, flickering green, her breathing steady but shallow like a faulty metronome on the screen, a sound that now made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end like a touch of icy silk, her babbled dreams, mirror, copy, Sarah mommy, seeping through the speaker like a cursed incantation. The next day, I searched obscure, anonymous Reddit forums, our nanny horror with its threads of shared nightmares, IR parenting creeps with testimonies from mothers whispering about soul thieves, fragmented stories of nannies who absorbed entire families, using children as bridges to steal entire lives, identities devoured in play sessions that lasted for hours. A mother from Boston, anonymous under the username Broken Mirror Mom. My son started calling me Sarah Mommy in his sleep, imitating her laugh in mine. She was gone, but her echo remained, a whisper in his throat that wasn't his. We moved cities, but the mirror is still broken. The knot in my stomach tightened like a noose, suffocating me with every breath, a coldness spreading from my belly to my lungs, making every inhalation an effort against the void. I confronted Sarah one afternoon in the 6th week. The October sun filtering through the blinds and slanting rays that cut across the room like knives of light. Emma safe, in daycare with a teacher who suspected nothing of the darkness looming. The apartment empty except for the low, constant hum of the refrigerator like a silent mechanical witness, its compressor purring like a satisfied cat. I waited for her in the living room, sitting on the velvet sofa with trembling hands around a cup of cold, bitter mint tea, the steam long since evaporated like my fractured sanity, the scent of the herb, now a perfume of nausea. She walked in at 4 o'clock sharp, cloth bag in hand, with a new book about magic mirrors that reflect dreams and secrets hidden in the depths, her shy smile curving lips that I now saw as soft, sticky traps, big blue eyes fixed on mine with an intensity that froze me. "Hi, Rebecca. Everything okay with your day? Did Emma leave any drawings for me?" I closed the door behind her with a definitive click that echoed like a cell bolt, the sound reverberating in my chest like an echo of condemnation. "Sit down, Sarah. Let's talk. I've seen the cameras. Everything. The imitations, the rehearsals with Emma, your mirror sessions. And what the hell are you doing with my daughter? Why are you using her as a puppet to copy me?" She paled then, the blush fleeing her cheeks like blood drained from a wound. But she didn't run away or stammer excuses. She sat down on the opposite sofa with a fragile, calculated grace, crossing her thin legs in her worn jeans, hands clasped in her lap as if in perverse prayer, blue eyes fixed on mine like magnets that drew not only my gaze but my very soul, a well that sucked out secrets. "I don't hurt you, Rebecca. I just learn from you. I absorb. You have everything I long for on lonely nights in Ridgefield. The handsome husband who looks at you as if you were the eternal sun, with eyes that crinkle just for you. The creative work where your words bring childhood dreams to life, pages that become worlds. The soft Google laughter that lights up entire rooms and makes Alex lean in to kiss your neck. The way you walk through Chelsea with your hips swaying, as if the world belongs to you by divine right. I am nobody, Rebecca. A shadow of a town where mothers like you are stories read secretly under the sheets with a flashlight, where 100-year-old trees seem like guardians of secrets no one wants to hear. Emma is my bridge, my living warm mirror. I use her to practice, to absorb you into her innocence. I copy your laughter into her little throat, your signature with an elegant curve into her clumsy hand, your hoarse whispers to Alex into her pure breath. I don't hurt her. I mold her to love me like she loves you, so that in her mind I am the Rebecca who cradles her, who signs her drawings, who whispers, "I missed you," in the dark. Soon I will be Rebecca to her, for when you go away on business trips, or worse, for when Alex sees me in the marital bed, with your voice saying, "Come closer, feel my skin," while my body moves like yours. It's envy, Rebecca, pure, sweet envy that eats away at the soul. I want your life, starting with your daughter's mind, the first mirror that reflects everything. Her voice was my voice at that moment. The exact, modulated intonation, the tick of biting her lower lip until it bled a pink trickle that she licked with her tongue sticking out, a gesture that I now saw as a consummate theft. And horror struck me like a blow to the solar plexus, robbing me of my breath in a muffled gasp, not raw, bloody violence, but a perversion of the most intimate and sacred identity, a theft of soul through my daughter's innocence. A rehearsal where Emma was the living bridge to devour my essence, my marriage, my motherhood. I called the police that same afternoon, burly officers in the apartment with spiral notebooks and crackling radios spitting static like interference from hell, but with no evidence of physical harm, only obsessive imitation, possible emotional and psychological grooming. Sarah left with a verbal warning and a smile that promised an inevitable return. Backpack in hand, disappearing into the elevator like smoke dissipating in the wind, her gray coat enveloping her like a cloak of living fog. The elite caregivers agency, with its gleaming loft in Soho, apologized with formal emails. "We are deeply sorry, Ms. Ellis, but without explicit breach of contract or evidence of abuse, our hands are tied. Sarah has impeccable references. We consider this a misunderstanding." Alex, pale and furious, changed the locks that night, the locksmith humming a pop song as he drilled into the door. But the damage was done, a worm in the apple of our family. Sarah had left her perverse seed, an echo that multiplied in Emma's mind like a silent virus. My daughter changed forever, a distorted reflection of myself, filtered through the blue eyes of the intruder. Now she looks at me with brown eyes that are mine by inheritance, but with Sarah's quick, nervous blinking when she became anxious during the interview. A tick she repeats when she looks at me during dinner, as if measuring my face against a stolen template. She repeats my everyday phrases with her shy and submissive intonation. "If it's not too much trouble, Mom, juice with ice so it's cool like a secret." Signing her princess drawings with my elegant curve on the R, scribbles that look like children's contracts but make my blood run cold, as if she were practicing for a day when I won't be there to sign. On sleepless nights, when the apartment creaks like a ship in a storm, I hear whispers in her room through the monitor. "Sarah, Mom is coming soon in the mirror. Copy well, Emma, Mom's laugh, Dad's kiss. Or the mirror will break and she'll see the real you, the one who is nobody." The horror is that she has already replaced me in her malleable mind, my daughter a bridge for the theft of my privacy, and I live with the echo of my own voice in hers, a broken mirror reflecting a stranger with my face, waiting for the day when Emma says, "I love you, Sarah, Mommy," out loud during dinner, with Alex smiling obliviously, and I am the ghost in the background of the reflection fading into the Connecticut fog. My name is Juana Herney, and I was 24 years old when my world collapsed, like a poorly constructed stage, with spotlights burning brightly and applause turning into accusatory silence. I was a freelance nanny in Seattle, Washington, one of those who survive on apps like Care.com and whispered recommendations in Capitol Hill cafes, where the aroma of roasted coffee mixes with the smoke of electronic cigarettes and the salt air of Puget Sound that seeps through the open doors. It wasn't my dream. I had studied theater at the University of Washington, dreaming of off-Broadway stages where my broken voices would resonate like thunder in other people's chests, with applause filling the void of my childhood in a Tacoma trailer park, where the smell of rancid frying and spilled beer was the soundtrack of my nights. But after graduating with debts up to my neck that smelled of fresh ink from federal loans and an ex who left me with a broken heart, his kisses that tasted of fake mint and lies, his smell of cheap cologne lingering on my sheets like a ghost, I needed the money to pay the rent on my studio in Belltown, overlooking Puget Sound, which glistened like contaminated mercury under the perpetual rain, cold drops drumming on the corrugated metal roof like impatient fingers. Babysitting other people's children paid the student bills that piled up like thick fog in my inbox, the cheap beers in dive bars where cigarette smoke and stranger's sweat stuck to my skin like a second layer, and the nights when I pretended that life was a script I could rewrite with a happy ending. My reviews were solid, imprinted on my mind like memorized dialogue. Juana is magical with children, calming them like no one else with her soft voice that smells like lavender. Sweet and reliable, she left my daughter sleeping like an angel, with the scent of fresh stories in the air. But everything changed with that offer on the app, an ad that seemed too perfect, like shiny, glittering bait in murky, dark waters, with the metallic smell of the trap lingering in the digital air. It was a Tuesday in October, the Seattle air thick and sticky with that humidity that gets into your bones like a cold, insistent finger, the leaden gray sky pressing against the cafe windows like a coffin lid, when I saw the message from the Harringtons. Live-in nanny wanted for 5-year-old girl, house on the outskirts of Bellevue, pay $20,500 a month plus in private room. Experience required, contact Margaret. The accompanying photo was of a modern, sterile mansion in the wooded hills, with a tinted glass facade that reflected Lake Washington like a broken, bleeding mirror, an immaculate garden with red rose bushes that seemed to drip thick sap in the gray, diffuse light, the air in the image charged with a silence that could be felt through the screen, like the smell of damp earth after a storm. The number was local, with a Bellevue area code, and the voice on the phone was Margaret Harrington's, soft and enveloping, with a southern accent. Georgia, perhaps, with that honeyed drawl that wrapped words like warm honey spilled over burnt bread. Juana, darling, your reviews are divine, like verses from a poem read aloud. Our Lily needs someone special, someone who understands the silence of big houses. My husband Thomas and I travel a lot for business, he in tech, with that smell of hot circuits and promises of wealth, I in philanthropy, handing out smiles that smell of expensive perfume. The house is big but lonely, with echoes whispering in the empty hallways. Can you come tomorrow for the interview? Bring your smile and maybe a story for Lily. I ignored the slight chill that ran down my neck when I heard "live in," the knot in my stomach twisting like a worm in damp earth, whispering "too good to be true" here, with the bitter taste of deception on my tongue. Sure, Margaret, I'll be there at 10, with the smell of fresh coffee on my breath. The ride on the 550 bus from Seattle to Bellevue was a blur of rain against the fogged-up window, cold drops sliding like slow tears down the dirty glass, the smell of wet vinyl seats, and passengers in soaked coats filling the air, Lake Washington passing by like a silvery undulating abyss under the leaden sky, waves lapping at the shore with a salty whisper seeping through the cracks in the bus. I got off at the Bellevue Square stop, the shopping center, an oasis of artificial lights shining like fake eyes in the fog, and took an Uber to the address. A private cul-de-sac at the end of a winding street, surrounded by tall, gnarled pine trees that leaned like silent, watchful sentinels, their needles whispering in the wind like dry tongues. The mansion stood like a monolith of glass and steel, reflective facades mirroring the distorted forest, the air around it heavy with the smell of damp pine and turned earth, as if the house itself were breathing heavily. Margaret opened the door with a broad, gleaming smile, 50-something platinum blonde, in a perfect bob that didn't move in the wind, a flowing white dress that floated like an elegant, translucent shroud, blue eyes that sparkled with an artificial warmth that didn't reach the wrinkled corners. Her perfume, heavy jasmine and clove, sweet as decadence, enveloping me like a sticky fog. Juana, come in, darling. How thin you are, like a dry reed that breaks in the wind. Thomas is in his study, smelling of black coffee and contracts, but Lily is excited, her little heart beating like a caged bird. The house was a labyrinth of cold, sterile luxury, polished black marble floors that echoed under my worn slippers like bones crunching in the dark, polarized glass walls overlooking the dense, oppressive forest, minimalist furniture in white and steel gray that absorbed the gray light of day rather than reflecting it, the air inside dry and heavy, with a subtle scent of floor wax and something else, a rancid sweetness like wilted flowers in a forgotten vase. Lily was a pale little 5-year-old thing, with straight, sticky black hair that fell like strands of ink across her forehead, gray eyes like clouds of impending storm, sitting in the living room with a picture book open on her lap, smiling when she saw me, a smile that didn't reach her sunken eyes. "Hi, I'm Lily. Do you know any fairy tales where the princesses don't wake up?" I quickly told her one about a princess in an enchanted forest who whispered secrets to the trees, my voice trembling slightly with nervousness, and Margaret clapped her jeweled hands, which tinkled like chains. "Perfect, Juana. We'll start tomorrow. Your room is upstairs, with a private bathroom and views of the forest that rustles at night. Thomas will give you the contract. His pen smells of ink and promises." The contract was simple and deceptive, pages printed on thick paper that smelled of fresh ink and cedar wood, standard responsibilities, baths with lavender soap, nutritious meals with crisp vegetables, stories whispered at sunset, but a clause buried on page 3, small print like twisted worms. The nanny agrees to absolute discretion regarding family life. No outside contact without permission, as part of domestic harmony. I signed with the pen Thomas handed me, its handle cold and heavy as a weapon, black ink staining my thumb like diluted blood, the metallic scent clinging to my skin. Thomas then appeared from his study, tall and stocky like a twisted oak tree, 50 years hardened by the Georgia sun, a gray suit hanging on him like a second wrinkled skin, brown eyes that sized me up like a piece of secondhand furniture, his breath smelling of morning bourbon and mint to cover it up. "Welcome, Juana. Do your job well, with that soft voice that calms children, and we'll be a happy family. The door to your room has a lock for security. The forest outside is treacherous at night." He showed me my room in the attic, a spacious room with a panoramic window overlooking the dense forest. A queen-size bed with Egyptian linen sheets that rustled to the touch like dry skin, an adjoining bathroom with white tiles that reflected the gray light like cold mirrors. But the door had an interior lock, and an exterior one, metal and heavy, with a click that echoed like a verdict. "For security, in case of intruders," Thomas said, his hand on my shoulder, a weight that lingered too long, fingers warm and sticky. I thought he was eccentric, a whim of the rich with trauma, but the pay was good, $2,500 a month, plus meals, and Lily was sweet, her laughter a tink-tink like rusty bells. I unpacked that night, the forest whispering outside with leaves scraping against the glass like nails on a chalkboard, the scent of damp pine seeping through the cracks, and I fell asleep to the sound of rain drumming on the roof like impatient fingers. A steady beat that lulled me into a restless sleep. The first day was normal, a veil of excitement that slowly tore away. I bathed Lily in the white porcelain tub, the hot, soapy water smelling of fresh lavender rising in sweet steam, her pale, soft skin slipping under my hands like cold silk, bubbles crackling against the surface like muffled laughter. We played house in the living room, wooden blocks smelling of polished cedar, piling up into unstable towers, her tink-tink laughter echoing in the dry air. And I had dinner with the family at the long oak table, Margaret chatting about charity galas in a honeyed voice that smelled of heavy jasmine perfume, Thomas grumbling about Silicon Valley startups with stale bourbon breath, Lily poking her broccoli with a fork that clinked against the plate like Morse code for boredom. I put her to bed with a whispered story, her head on my shoulder smelling of sweet apple shampoo. "Good night, Juana. Don't let the trees whisper too much," she said, gray eyes closing like clouds at dusk. I retired to my room, the door closing with a soft click that wasn't mine, the handle turning cold under my sweaty palm. I knocked, my voice trembling in the empty hallway. "Margaret." "Thomas, the door." Absolute silence, broken only by the distant drip of a faucet in the bathroom, like eternal tears. Panic rose like acid bile up my esophagus, my heart hammering in my chest like a fist against a metal door, the air in the hallway thick and stale with the smell of floor wax and something else, a rancid sweetness like wilted flowers in stagnant water. I waited for hours, the wall clock below striking 3 with a ticking that echoed like someone else's pulse, until the door opened with a squeak of rusty hinges. Thomas, his silhouette outlined against the light in the hallway, with a smile that didn't reach his brown eyes, his lips stretched over the yellowed teeth. "Test of loyalty, Juana. You don't leave without permission. You're family now, and families don't leave." I tried to run, bare feet slipping on the cold marble that burned like ice, but he grabbed my arm with nails that dug into my skin like butcher hooks, the pain radiating like liquid fire through my biceps. "Scream, and Lily pays the price. Her skin is as soft as yours, but more fragile." She dragged me down to the basement, concrete stairs spiraling down like a dark throat, the air changing to a damp, musty smell like earth turned after an open grave, fluorescent lights buzzing like angry flies overhead. "Welcome to your new life, Nanny. Here silence is your best friend." The abuse started subtly, like a whisper that turns into a scream stuck in your throat, a constant drip that erodes stone. The next day, Margaret punished me for looking at Thomas the wrong way during breakfast. A fleeting glance at his brown eyes that she interpreted as insolence, her heavy jasmine perfume enveloping me like toxic fog as she dragged me to the basement, the cold concrete biting my bare feet like wolf teeth. They tied me to a rusty metal chair, my bare feet stuffed into a dented steel bucket that smelled of rust and stagnant water, the raw leather straps scraping my ankles like live snakes. "For disobedience, darling, learn to lower your gaze, or the fire will teach you." He poured boiling water from a white porcelain teapot, the steam rising in white, scalding clouds that burned my face like dragon's breath, the liquid hitting my feet with an angry hiss, skin instantly bubbling into red, translucent blisters that burst like balloons of flesh, the pain a white lightning bolt rising up my legs like roots of fire, radiating to my groin and belly, an agony that arched my back against the chair, nails digging into my palms until warm threads of blood dripped onto the floor. I screamed until my throat tore like wet paper, my voice breaking into hoarse squawks that echoed off the concrete like echoes in a well, the smell of cooked flesh and singed hair filling the basement like a macabre banquet, hot tears rolling down my cheeks and mixing with the sweat that soaked my blouse. "Shh. Darling, it's for your own good. Feel how the heat cleanses you, makes you pure for Lily. Learn to obey, and the pain will fade like mist in the sun." They untied me after what seemed like hours, my feet bandaged with dirty, rough rags that scraped at the open blisters like salt on fresh wounds, the pain throbbing with every heartbeat, and they sent me upstairs to cook dinner, limping up the stairs with each step a renewed fire rising up my legs like lava, the cold marble against my burned heels, a cruel contrast. I smiled at Lily in the kitchen, the aroma of sautéed onions rising from the hot pan, my voice trembling as I said, Today we're having pasta with red sauce, sweetie, like good dragon blood. Juana, why are you walking funny? Does it hurt? I burned myself with hot soup, sweetie. Nothing serious. Just a little kiss from the fire. But her gray eyes measured me, wise beyond her years, the silence between us heavy with a weight that smelled of buried secrets. The days melted into a thick fog of terror and perverse routine, time stretching like rubber on a broken clock. Each hour a cycle of pain that was engraved on my skin like tattoos of fire. They hit me for nothing, whims that smelled like excuses. Thomas with his thick leather belt that crackled as it unrolled, sharp pulls that left red, swollen welts on my back and thighs, the leather biting into my flesh with a snap that echoed in the basement like a whip in stale air. For not serving the wine fast enough, bitch, the glass clinked like your insolence. Margaret, with her open hand and gold rings cutting into my skin, slaps that left my cheeks swollen and throbbing. My lower lip split, bleeding a salty trickle that dripped down my chin. For talking too much to Lily, filling her head with your stories of free princesses, as if you were one. They stubbed cigarettes out on my skin like possession rituals. Thomas smoked red Marlboros, the hot orange filter pressed into my forearm until the flesh sizzled and bubbled. The smell of burnt tobacco mixing with my salty sweat, and the metallic stench of charred skin, smoke rising in gray spirals that stung my teary eyes. So you remember your place, Juana. The smell of burning is the perfume of obedience. Once, Margaret did it on my inner thigh, the cigarette grazing the sensitive skin near my groin, the pain radiating like liquid fire up my belly and into my womb, an intimate agony that made me double over, muffled sobs escaping my torn throat. For looking at Thomas with the eyes of a bitch in heat, smelling of desire you don't deserve. The basement was my private prison, a labyrinth of damp, cold concrete that smelled of mold and old urine. Rusty iron chains on my ankles for nights of reflection that lasted until dawn, the metal biting into my skin until it left red grooves oozing yellowish pus. Absolute darkness, where the hum of fluorescent lights was my only companion, a constant purr that echoed in my skull like flies on a corpse. Rats scurrying in the shadows, with tails brushing my bare legs like cold, slimy fingers, their bristly whiskers against my bristly skin. But the worst, the perverse and suffocating core of the horror, was the violation of my privacy, an abuse that seeped into the depths of my being like poison in the blood. They forced me to play with Lily during the day, baths where the hot water smelled of rose soap, and her soft skin slipped under my trembling hands, stories whispered in her crib where her milky breath against my cheek was a reminder of the innocence they were stealing from me. But later, when the house was plunged into the silence of the night, Thomas would visit me in my room, the door opening with a creak of hinges that smelled of rancid oil, his silhouette outlined against the light in the hallway, like a predator in the darkness. You're the perfect nanny, Juana. With that soft skin that smells of fresh fear, he would growl, his voice hoarse as gravel in his throat, rough calloused hands tearing my cotton nightgown with a sound of fabric ripping that echoed in the silence, his heavy, sweaty body crushing me against the mattress that creaked like old bones, the smell of stale bourbon and tobacco permeating the air as his full lips kissed my neck with bites that left red marks like vampire kisses. The rapes were meticulous rituals. They began with kisses that tasted of fake mint and thick saliva, his fingers probing me with dirty nails that tore my inner skin, pain radiating from my core like roots of fire, his weight pressing the air from my lungs until I gasped like a fish on dry land, salty sweat dripping from his forehead onto my chest, mixing with my hot tears rolling down my temples. They ended in bruises on my hips and thighs, purple marks that throbbed with every heartbeat, his final grunt an animalistic roar that smelled of rotten victory. Good girl, take what I give you, like Lily takes her stories. Margaret sometimes watched from the half-open door, her silhouette outlined in the yellow light of the hallway, smiling with red-painted lips that glowed like fresh blood. Teach her to be a good wife, Thomas. Make her moan like I do for you, with that voice that breaks with pleasure. They would beat me afterwards if I didn't respond well, if my moans weren't enthusiastic enough. Boiling water poured on my genitals in a metal bucket that hissed on contact. The pain, a white hell that arched my back and made me urinate blood for days. The smell of cooked flesh and urine mingling in the basement, like a perfume of humiliation. Margaret laughing in a honeyed voice. Feel how it cleanses you, darling. The fire burns away the filth of your rebellion. Once, in a perversion that broke my soul, they forced me to play with Thomas while Margaret watched, Lily asleep upstairs with the monitor on like a blind eye. Be like me, Juana. Move like my body in bed, Margaret whispered, her hand guiding mine to her breast, the fabric of her silk nightgown scraping my skin like fine sand while Thomas penetrated me with grunts that smelled of sweat and domination. The air in the room heavy with the scent of forced sex and salty tears. Moan my name, Juana, make it sound like mine in the dark. I screamed Margaret until my voice cracked, the taste of bile and shame on my tongue, and she applauded, kissing my sweaty cheek. Good, my shadow. Soon Lily won't notice the difference. Lily was my tortured salvation, a ray of light in the abyss. I loved her with a ferocity that hurt. Her tink-tink laughter, like rusty bells, was the only sound that didn't make my ears bleed. Her soft skin smelling of apple soap when I bathed her was a reminder of the innocence that was being stolen from me drop by drop. But every story I told her in her crib, my voice trembling like a leaf in the wind, was a reminder of my glass cage. Every hug she gave me against my chest was a knife in my heart. Juana, why do you have marks on your arms like broken branches in the forest? Silly falls, sweetie, with the wind blowing hard. Now sleep, and the trees will whisper beautiful songs. But she saw her gray eyes wise beyond her years, the silence between us heavy with a weight that smelled of secrets buried in damp earth. And one night, as I tucked her in with sheets that smelled of lavender and my own fear, she whispered in my ear, warm breath against my cheek. Juana, save me too. Parents whisper ugly things at night, like the wind breaking branches. Hot tears rolled down my cheeks, salty in my mouth, and I kissed her on the forehead, skin soft as petals. But then Margaret came in, her heavy jasmine perfume enveloping us like a toxic fog, and dragged me to the basement for filling her head with dirty lies. Thomas's belt crackling in the air before biting into my back, red welts throbbing like someone else's heartbeat. The pain of fire that made me smell my own charred flesh. Months passed in an endless cycle of pain and perverse routine, time stretching like elastic on a faulty clock that marked not hours, but accumulated agonies, each day a fresh canvas for his brush strokes of cruelty. Cigarettes stubbed out on my bare breasts. The orange filter pressed against the sensitive skin of my breasts until the flesh sizzled and bubbled like bacon in a hot pan, the smell of burnt tobacco mingling with my salty sweat, and the metallic stench of charred skin in blisters oozing yellowish pus. Thomas laughing hoarsely. Look how she bristles, Margaret, like a nipple in the cold, but it's the fire that makes her obey. Margaret's slaps left my eye swollen and throbbing, my cheek burning as if it had been branded with a hot iron. My lower lip split, bleeding a salty, coppery trickle that dripped down my chin and stained my blouse. For not smiling enough when you serve coffee, darling. Your face must shine like mine for Lily. Boiling water on my hands for burning dinner slightly, the scalding liquid poured from a steaming glass jug. Steam burning my nostrils like the breath of hell, the skin on my palms reddening and blistering into red spots that crackled when I moved my fingers. The pain, a lightning bolt shooting up my arms to my shoulders. Margaret sniffing the air with delight. It smells of purity, Juana. The steam cleanses your filth, makes you worthy to touch Lily. Intimacy was the most perverse thing, an abuse that seeped into the depths of my being like sweet poison in the blood, contaminating every touch, every breath. They forced me to play with Lily during the day, baths where the hot, soapy water smelled of fresh lavender and rose in sweet steam that fogged up the mirror, her pale, soft skin sliding under my trembling hands like cold, vulnerable silk, bubbles crackling against the surface of the tub like laughter drowned in water. But later, when the house was plunged into the heavy silence of night, Thomas would visit me in my attic room, the door opening with a creak of rusty hinges that smelled of rancid oil and hot metal, his silhouette silhouetted against the dim yellow light of the hallway, like a predator in the shadows, the air changing to a heavy smell of stale bourbon and tobacco impregnated in his shirt. "You're the perfect babysitter, Juana, with that soft skin that smells of fresh fear and lily soap," he would growl, his voice hoarse as gravel scraping his dry throat, rough, calloused hands, thick fingers stained with contract ink, tearing my cotton camisole with a sound of torn fabric that echoed in the silence like a muffled scream, loose threads falling to the floor like blood from an open wound. His heavy, sweaty body crushed against mine on the queen-size bed, the mattress creaking like old bones under the weight, the smell of stale bourbon and tobacco permeating the air as his thick, cracked lips kissed my neck with bites that left red, throbbing marks like the kisses of a hungry vampire, teeth scraping my skin until a trickle of salty blood flowed, his tongue licking it with a guttural moan that vibrated against my jugular. The rapes were meticulous and prolonged rituals, beginning with kisses that tasted of fake mint and thick, viscous saliva, his fingers probing me with dirty, blunt nails that tore at the sensitive inner skin, pain radiating from my core like roots of liquid fire rising through my belly and digging into my womb, an agony that arched my back against the sheets that smelled of stale sweat and my own salty terror. His weight pressed the air from my lungs until I gasped like a fish gasping for air on dry, dusty land, salty sweat dripping from his bald forehead onto my bare chest, mixing with my hot tears that rolled down my temples and soaked the pillow in salty pools. They ended up as purple, swollen bruises on my hips and inner thighs, marks that throbbed with every heartbeat like someone else's heartbeat in my flesh. His final grunt, an animalistic, victorious roar that smelled of bitter semen and rotten dominance. "Good girl, take what I give you like Lily takes her stories, with your mouth open and your eyes closed." Margaret sometimes watched from the half-open door, her silhouette outlined in the dim yellow light of the hallway like a widow in mourning, smiling with blood-red lips that glistened wet like fresh wounds. "Teach her to be a good wife, Thomas. Make her moan like I do for you in this very bed, with that voice that breaks with feigned pleasure, smelling of desire that is not his." They would beat me afterwards if I didn't respond well, if my moans weren't enthusiastic or prolonged enough, if my body didn't arch with the perfect curve that Margaret demanded. Boiling water poured onto my genitals in a dented metal bucket that hissed on contact with my sensitive skin, the scalding steam burning my nostrils like the breath of hell, the liquid crashing against my intimate flesh with a furious, bubbling hiss, skin reddening and blistering into red, translucent moles that burst like vulnerable flesh balloons, the pain a white, blinding hell rising through my belly like viscous lava, radiating to my spine and causing my legs to convulse in uncontrollable spasms, urine mixed with blood dripping onto the floor in pink puddles that smelled of copper and utter humiliation, Margaret laughing in a honeyed, dripping voice. "Feel how it cleanses you, darling. The fire burns away the filth of your rebellion, makes you pure and ready for Thomas, smelling of fresh obedience." Once, in a perversion that broke my soul into irreparable fragments, they forced me to play with Thomas, while Margaret watched from the king-size bed, the master bedroom with its crumpled Egyptian cotton sheets and the lingering scent of our morning sex, now contaminated by her heavy jasmine perfume. Lily asleep upstairs with the monitor on like a blind, blinking eye, transmitting her regular breathing like someone else's heartbeat. Be like me, Juana. Move like my body in this bed. Feel how Alex, no, Thomas, enters you, whispered Margaret, her hand guiding mine to her bare chest, under the silk nightgown that scraped my skin like fine abrasive sand, the soft but treacherous fabric clinging to my sweaty palm as Thomas penetrated me with guttural grunts that smelled of stale sweat and absolute domination, his hot, foul breath against my neck like a dragon breathing smoke, the air in the room heavy and suffocating with the scent of forced sex, bitter semen, and salty tears dripping from my eyes onto the sheets. Moan my name, Juana. Make it sound like mine in the darkness of this bed, with that hoarse voice that breaks in pleasure, smelling of desire that is not yours, but mine. I screamed, Margaret, until my voice broke like fine glass under a hammer, the taste of bile and shame flooding my mouth like a river of acid, and she applauded from the edge of the bed, kissing my sweaty, salty cheek with lips as cold as marble. Good, my perfect shadow. Soon Lily won't notice the difference. She'll call you Mom in her dreams, and Thomas will make love to you, smelling my perfume on your skin. Lily was my tortured salvation and my eternal damnation, a fragile ray of light in the black, viscous abyss of the basement. Her tink-tink laughter like rusty, fragile bells was the only sound that didn't make my ears bleed in the darkness. Her soft, pale skin smelling of sweet, fresh apple soap when I bathed her in the porcelain tub was a cruel reminder of the innocence that was stolen from me, drop by drop with each rape, each burn. I loved her with a ferocity that hurt like a knife in my stomach. Her chubby hugs against my bruised chest were a balm that burned my open wounds, but every story I told her in her white-barred crib, my voice trembling like a dry leaf in the autumn wind, was a reminder of my cage of glass and steel. Every kiss on her soft, rose-petal forehead was a knife stabbing my beating heart. Juana, why do you have marks on your arms, like broken branches in the forest that creak at night? Silly falls, sweetheart, with the wind blowing hard and smelling of wet pine. Now sleep, and the trees will whisper beautiful songs just for you. But she saw everything, her wise, ancient gray eyes beyond her 5 years, the silence between us heavy with an oppressive weight that smelled of secrets buried in damp, clay soil. And one night, as I tucked her in with sheets that smelled of dried lavender and my own salty fear impregnated in the fabric, she whispered in my ear with warm, milky breath against my cheek, her chubby little hand clinging to my finger like a lifeline. Juana, save me too. Dads whisper ugly things at night, like the wind that breaks branches and smells like burnt smoke. I'm scared of their kisses that sting. Hot, salty tears rolled down my cheeks, the bitter taste in my mouth like bile of helplessness, and I kissed her on the forehead, skin soft as fresh rose petals in the rain. But then Margaret came in like a gale, her heavy jasmine and clove perfume enveloping us like a toxic, suffocating fog, red-painted nails digging into my arm as she dragged me to the basement for filling her head with dirty lies that smell of rebellion. Thomas's belt crackling in the stale air before biting into my bare back with a sharp snap, red and swollen welts throbbing like someone else's heartbeat in my flesh, the pain a fire that made me smell my own scorched and sweaty skin, Margaret laughing with a honeyed voice dripping with venom. Feel how it marks you, darling, the leather smells of loyalty. It makes you worthy of touching Lily again. Months passed in an endless suffocating cycle of pain and perverse routine, time stretching like taut elastic on a faulty clock that marked not fleeting hours, but agonies accumulated in layers of dead skin and fresh scars, each day a blank canvas for her brushstrokes of meticulous ritual cruelty. Cigarettes stubbed out on my bare, sensitive breasts. the orange burning filter of Thomas's Marlboros pressed against the soft skin of my breasts until the flesh sizzled and bubbled like fresh bacon in a hot, greasy frying pan, the smell of burnt tobacco and chemicals mingling with my salty sweat and the metallic, nauseating stench of charred skin in red, translucent blisters oozing yellowish, viscous pus, Thomas laughing with a hoarse, guttural voice that smelled of stale bourbon. "Look how your nipple bristles, Juana, like in the cold of the morning, but it's the fire that makes you obey. The smoke that rises and stings your eyes like fake tears." Margaret's slaps left my left eye swollen and throbbing like a balloon about to burst, my cheek burning as if it had been branded with a red-hot iron, my lower lip split and bleeding, dripping a salty, coppery trickle down my chin and staining my cotton blouse with red spots that smelled of rusty iron. For not smiling enough when you serve the steaming coffee, darling, your face must shine like mine for Lily, or the leather will teach you the curve. Boiling water on my hands for burning dinner slightly. The scalding, bubbling liquid poured from a thick glass jug that smoked like a miniature volcano, steam burning my nostrils and eyes with a breath of sulfurous hell, skin on my palms reddening and blistering into red, crispy spots that burst when I moved my fingers with a wet, sucking sound. The pain a white, blinding flash that shot up my arms to my shoulders and neck, radiating like roots of fire that made me arch my back in spasms. Margaret sniffing the air with sadistic delight, her nose wrinkled as if inhaling an exquisite perfume. "It smells of purity, Juana. The steam cleanses your rebellious filth, makes you worthy of touching Lily with hands that do not tremble with rage." The intimacy was the most perverse and suffocating thing, an abuse that seeped into the depths of my being like sweet, sticky poison in my blood, contaminating every touch, every shared breath, every whisper in the darkness. They forced me to play with Lily during the day, baths where the hot, soapy water smelled of fresh lavender, and rose in sweet, enveloping steam that fogged up the bathroom mirror like the breath of secrets. Her pale, soft skin sliding beneath my trembling, bandaged hands like cold, vulnerable silk against oozing blisters. Bubbles crackling against the surface of the porcelain tub like laughter drowned in murky water. But later, when the house was plunged into the heavy, expectant silence of night, with the forest whispering outside like dry tongues, Thomas would visit me in my attic room, the door opening with a long creak of rusty hinges that smelled of rancid oil and hot metal from use, his silhouette silhouetted against the dim yellow light of the hallway like a predator in the shadows, the air suddenly changing to a heavy, oppressive smell of stale bourbon that burned the nostrils and tobacco impregnated in his wrinkled cotton shirt. "You're the perfect babysitter, Juana, with that soft skin that smells of fresh fear, and lily soap mixed with your salty sweat," he growled, his voice hoarse as gravel scraping his dry, phlegm-filled throat, rough. Calloused hands, thick fingers stained with black ink from contracts signed in metaphorical blood, tearing my thin cotton camisole with a sound of torn fabric that echoed in the silence like a prolonged, muffled scream, loose threads falling to the wooden floor like blood from an open, oozing wound. His heavy, sweaty body pressed against mine on the queen-size bed, the mattress creaking like old fragile bones under the combined weight, the smell of stale bourbon and tobacco permeating the air like a toxic fog as his thick, cracked lips kissed my neck with bites that left red, throbbing marks like the kisses of a hungry vampire on my jugular, teeth scraping my skin until a trickle of salty, metallic blood flowed, his rough, hot tongue licking it with a guttural, animalistic moan that vibrated against my skin like a faulty motor. The rapes were meticulous and prolonged rituals, beginning with kisses that tasted of fake mint and thick, viscous saliva that stuck to the palate like mucus, his fingers poking at me with dirty, blunt nails that tore the sensitive inner skin of my folds, pain radiating from my center like roots of liquid, corrosive fire rising through my tense belly and digging into my uterus like thorns, an agony that arched my back against the sheets that smelled of stale sweat, and my own salty terror impregnated in the fabric. His weight pressed the air from my lungs until I gasped like a fish, gasping for air on dry, dusty land, salty, acidic sweat dripping from his bald, hairless forehead onto my bare, bristling chest, mixing with my hot, bitter tears that rolled down my temples and soaked the pillow in salty puddles that smelled of despair. They ended up as purple, swollen bruises on my hips and inner thighs, marks that throbbed with every heartbeat like foreign, alien heartbeats in my desecrated flesh. His final grunt, an animalistic, victorious roar that smelled of bitter, thick semen and rotten dominance like meat left out in the sun. Good girl, take what I give you, like Lily takes her stories, with your mouth open and your eyes closed, smelling of obedience that tastes of salt and fear. Margaret sometimes watched from the half-open door, her silhouette outlined in the dim yellow light of the hallway like a widow in eternal mourning, smiling with blood-red lips that glistened wet and shiny like fresh, oozing wounds. Teach her to be a good wife, Thomas. Make her moan like I do for you in this very bed, with that voice that breaks in feigned and forced pleasure, smelling of desire that is not hers but mine, of sweat mixed with perfume. They would beat me afterwards if I didn't respond well, if my moans weren't enthusiastic or prolonged enough, if my body didn't arch with the perfect submissive curve that Margaret demanded on her nights of vigilance. Boiling water poured onto my genitals from a dented and rusty metal bucket that hissed on contact with my sensitive and vulnerable skin, the scalding sulfurous steam burning my nostrils and eyes with the breath of eternal hell, the liquid crashing against my intimate flesh with a furious bubbling hiss that echoed in the basement like a lament, skin reddening and blistering into red, translucent moles that burst like balloons of vulnerable raw flesh, the pain a white, blinding hell rising through my tense belly like viscous, corrosive lava, radiating to my spine and causing my legs to convulse in uncontrollable, humiliating spasms, urine mixed with blood dripping onto the concrete floor in sticky pink puddles that smelled of rusty copper and absolute humiliation. Margaret laughing with a voice as sweet and dripping as poisoned honey. Feel how it cleanses you inside, darling. The fire burns away the filth of your rebellion, makes you pure and ready for Thomas, smelling of fresh obedience and renewed flesh. Once, in a perversion that broke my soul into irreparable bleeding fragments, they forced me to play with Thomas while Margaret watched from the large, unmade double bed, the master bedroom with its crumpled Egyptian cotton sheets stained with the lingering scent of our morning sex, now contaminated by her heavy jasmine and clove perfume that stung my nose. Lily asleep upstairs with the monitor on like a blind, blinking eye, transmitting her regular breathing like a foreign, mechanical heartbeat. Be like me, Juana. Move like my body in this bed that smells of us. Feel Thomas entering you as he enters me, whispered Margaret, her hand guiding mine to her naked, flaccid breast under the silk nightgown that scraped my bruised skin like fine, abrasive sand, the soft but treacherous fabric clinging to my sweaty, trembling palm as Thomas penetrated me with guttural, animalistic grunts that smelled of stale sweat and absolute domination, his hot, foul breath against my neck like a dragon exhaling sulfuric smoke, the air in the room heavy and suffocating with the scent of forced sex, bitter, thick semen dripping between my thighs, salty tears rolling from my eyes onto the rumpled sheets. Moan my name, Juana. Make it sound like mine in the darkness of this bed, with that hoarse voice that breaks in feigned and forced pleasure, smelling of desire that is not yours but mine, of sweat mixed with my jasmine perfume. I screamed, Margaret, until my voice broke like fine glass under a heavy hammer. the taste of bile and shame flooding my mouth like a river of corrosive acid. And she applauded from the edge of the bed, kissing my sweaty, salty cheek with lips cold as carved marble. Good, my perfect and obedient shadow. Soon Lily won't notice the difference. She'll call you Mommy in her babbling dreams. And Thomas will make love to you, smelling my perfume on your burnt skin, feeling my curve on your broken body. I escaped on a night of furious storm, the wind howling outside like a chorus of souls in torment. Rain lashing the roof like frantic nails, bandaged and blistered feet limping through the dense dark forest. Pine branches tearing my skin like claws. The smell of damp earth and sticky resin filling my gasping lungs. Blood dripping from fresh cuts on my arms that smelled of copper and distant freedom. I ran to the main road, the wet asphalt slippery under my burned feet. A truck driver in a Peterbilt picked me up with headlights cutting through the fog like knives, his cab smelling of diesel and stale coffee. "Girl, you look like a ghost. What happened to you?" The police in Bellevue believed me after seeing the photos. Basement cameras that Thomas had forgotten to turn off, showing boiling water, hissing cigarettes, rapes in shadows, bruises throbbing like someone else's heartbeat, the smell of smoke and blood lingering on my clothes. The Harringtons were arrested that same night, sirens wailing on the private street like laments of belated justice. Lily saved and sent to her grandmother in Georgia, her tink-tink laughter now an echo in my memory. But the terror stayed with me, a broken whisper in the darkness. Scars that itch and burn at night, as if the skin remembers the fire. Dreams where Margaret whispers, "You are ours forever," smelling of obedience. And the click of a door that won't open, the forest creaking outside like nails on wood. I live in Portland now, far from Seattle. No longer a nanny. I work in a bookstore, smelling of old paper and ink. But every doorbell rings, freezes my blood, waiting for the creak of hinges, the weight of a hand on my shoulder, the whisper of family